golden Bitcoin, 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 golden Bitcoin. Voltoro.
Season 9 of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast is sponsored by Voltoro, the exchange where you deal with honest money, gold, silver, and Bitcoin. Joshua from Voltoro is also a big fan of the Lightning Network, so if you go to bitcoin-takeover.com/Voltoro and you scan the QR code, you might just be the person who claims 1,000 Satoshis on the Lightning Network. And to all of you who are also into bits, that's 10 bits. So scan the code with Blue Wallet or Breeze and be one of the lucky 100 people who get to claim the prize. So hurry! Also, thanks to the generosity of Evan Rose and Vake, follow them on Twitter at GoodNoche, GoodNoche for Evan Rose, and at Vake Raj, Vakeraj for Vake. Follow them, and thanks to their generosity, there is no second sponsor to this show. This is really unprecedented from this point of view because there's community demand for Chris Derose from Bitcoin Uncensored, and let me tell you that I was very excited to interview him. And this is a 3.5-hour interview, so there's a lot to unpack here, and you're gonna have a great time. Trust me. I've always wanted to say this, so hello party people, and welcome to Season 9, Episode 1 of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. My guest today is Chris Derose, who is the only person eligible to say hello party people in the Bitcoin space.
It's my decentralized trademark. You can't infringe upon it.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that there is some sort of oracle that's going to look up something that's on a blockchain and concerns the trademark for that catchphrase. And I'm gonna be in a big trouble. Like there's some sort of smart contract which is going to subtract funds from my wallet, and then I'm screwed. I'm gonna go wrecked.
You're in big trouble. What's up, party people? This is Chris Derose. It's been a while. Glad you're here. Looking forward to today. Let's see where things go.
I'm Vlad and I'm glad. I get a bit of echo from your side. I hope that you're using headphones or something. If you're not, it's completely fine. You're Chris Derose. You can echo because your voice is a lot more powerful than the rest of the plebs on Twitter. So you don't even need to be on Twitter because you live in other people's minds already and they project what they think they know about you to essentially estimate what you're up to these days.
That's amazing to hear. I am flattered that anybody even knows my name.
Oh yeah, you go ahead and be modest about it, but you are quite a personality in the Bitcoin space, and you have had possibly the best podcast ever in Bitcoin, and I still listen to some episodes from Bitcoin Uncensored. I'm very sorry that not all of them are available because I would binge listen to them in a weekend or something, but I don't think a weekend would suffice. It doesn't matter anyway, you get the point. So, we have two ways of approaching this because this season is about philosophy and maybe the moral and ethical reasons why we decided to get into the Bitcoin space and what our personal philosophies are and to which extent they align with this universe and macrocosm that we spend so much time analyzing. Or else we can begin with the questions that you have received from people on Twitter who miss you.
You tell me. Either path is fine. I probably should preface this with some kind of a trigger warning. I don't know if that's still needed, but there's a lot of people who love to hate people out there, and then in that process they end up getting rattled in their beliefs and then blaming you, and then like this weird cycle happens where they continue to listen to you and then blame you for doing the thing that causes them to listen to you and also causes them to distress. So in any case, trigger warning ahead. I've not improved in any of my manners since the last time you've heard me.
Right, and I also know that there are some laws that are called the Derose Laws, and the second one of them was called something along the lines of scammers eventually scam themselves, or something like that.
That sounds about right. There's a few of these laws. There's the Bitcoin Uncensored laws, there's the Derose Laws, and yeah, we are probably all in the process of scamming ourselves, even as we speak. Very few exceptions to that.
I sure hope that it will not be the case, at least not during this recording. So let me ask you, Chris. Vake wants to know how you're doing these days. And Stop in Decrypt completes the question by adding that he wants to know how your basket of shitcoins is doing.
Okay, well, I am doing fantastic. I have zero complaints. If anything, my only complaint is that I've gotten complacent in my success, I guess. I don't know. I'm very happy. In my personal life, things are just excellent. And then as far as my shitcoin basket's been doing fantastic as well. The most immoral thing in this space is to bring up the index. Everybody has this first principle that the indexing can't work and or that it must underperform Bitcoin. And they have this opinion in the face of the evidence, which has almost always suggested that indexing performs better. I like using a fairly objective source of this rather than my own bookkeeping. So I usually use Panda Analytics, and then as we're speaking right now, I'm going to see how the shitcoin index is doing. 9 times out of 10, it's outperforming Bitcoin, despite admittedly that being impossible. Again, the evidence is oftentimes in contrast with the possibility. So as we speak, I'm doing this now. Let's see how. If you go to Panda Analytics, there's a tool you can use. I can't speak highly enough of this. I usually weigh the assets based on market cap, but volume is a fine choice as well. And I compare that against Bitcoin. Where's that setting? Yeah, at the very bottom here. And I guess where do you want to run the comparison against? Like as far back as possible, or just this year? You tell me, Vlad.
I don't know, Chris. Right now I'm thinking about our last conversation, and you told me that you have always owned 1 Bitcoin and you will always own 1 Bitcoin. So now that I figure out that there is an expanded universe beyond this 1 Bitcoin holding, I'm not sure if I want to proceed.
Well, I have my own. I have spent a lot of time on my own financial needs, doing what is, in my estimation, decentralization, and it's caused me a lot of problems, which, frankly, it's probably going to be a running theme, like just this sort of catastrophe that is the Bitcoin idea space, wherein all the ideas are the things that we believe unless it comes a consequence of the price, in which case we no longer believe them. It's just that there's no match between anything at this point here, even including the underperformance of the shitcoin index and the results. Yeah, okay. So if you look, you know what? I am underperforming Bitcoin at this time.
Yay!
Yeah.
This is convenient,
fine,
right?
yes. Yeah, I mean, it also demonstrates like a lack of understanding too about the index, because the index, it kind of doesn't matter in a lot of ways. Like I'm trying to just keep things empirical, and in so doing, I'm able to make claims. But if 90% of the market value is in Bitcoin, your index is going to be 90% Bitcoin. And because of the narcissism of petty difference, you'll find that is the most outrageous thing that some of these Twitter people have ever heard. And I don't know why, because you're at the very least 90% aligned with people. At the very least, if not more.
Okay, but this is only applicable if you're thinking in fiat. If you're thinking in Bitcoin, then are you up or are you down if you buy shitcoins?
I think when you say thinking in, I'm interpreting that meaning like
unit of account.
Right. So then if you're using the unit of account of Bitcoin, then you end up in a very perverse situation where you can never make money, I think. I have to think about that, because it depends on how much you want to like extend the metaphor, right? Because thinking in Bitcoin almost means that you can't spend it or something, or like that you can't contemplate selling your Bitcoin for dollars. I don't know. The truth is, we all know what the unit of account is. The unit of account is the dollar. So in a world where the unit of account isn't the dollar, and that may be an admirable world to be in, it's hard for me to extrapolate out, because you're going to need like milk, and then you're going to be without much luck if you're trying to calculate the price of milk in Bitcoin, and then you're trying to compare other investments in Bitcoin. So I don't know.
This is not about milk. This is about a basket of shitcoins that supposedly sometimes outperforms Bitcoin price appreciation.
I'd have to do the numbers on that. I'm trying to think of how the math simplifies in my head, because you have, like, typically the way the index works is like Bitcoin goes up, then the shitcoins go up, and then there's like this alternating cycle there. So in the alternating cycle where the shitcoins go up, then you are losing Bitcoin, because you could have bought Bitcoin and captured that exuberance and then converted that exuberance into Bitcoin. You can end up on that cycle with more Bitcoin if you're rebalancing regularly. I guess it kind of doesn't matter what your unit account is in that model, because it just, I don't think it matters what your unit account is in that model, because it should be the exact same unit of account delta between using US dollars for unit of account and using Bitcoin as your unit account there. Again, all this stuff is relative to the US dollar no matter what you do, it seems. So you can use Bitcoin as a proxy for the US dollar, but then it still means there's some notion of stability somewhere, like regardless of the unit of account, that is efficiently rebalanced anyways as a function of a marketplace and an exchange. If like inflation went up tomorrow and like the market was efficient in every other way, then Bitcoin would probably also go up something commensurate to that. But we're living in weird times. Like, I don't even know that inflation's as meaningful as it once was, because you have these strange economic controls where like lumber goes up by a lot and maybe gas goes up by a lot, but we are able to keep tomato prices down. So like the CPI ends up being only nominally up. Or like, I don't know, you end up like having to get a job now that may require a college education for which the price has gone up like substantially, but that's not captured in the CPI, but that does represent, if you were to like map it onto your annual wages, it does represent like a diminished buying power. I don't know. I have to confess, a lot of like the morals in society are completely up in the air. If you're coming to me for clarity, you're going to be very disappointed in this interview, I think. I don't think there's been more clarity on many things since the last time you've heard me speak, unfortunately. Does that answer your question? I don't know.
There would be at least one person in the comments who would be disappointed, because Vin Armani posted a GIF and told me to send it to you, and it's essentially Princess Leia from the first Star Wars film, and that's episode 4, but it doesn't matter. And it's the one where there's that hologram which says, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." Aww. So that's what Vin Armani wants to say. I have hope.
I don't know that I have clarity. I definitely have hope. That one I can give you. You may not like it, but I can give it to you. Clarity less so.
Okay, so there is Bry Payson, I don't know. He wants to know what you can do with BTC.
What I can do with BTC? As in,
I have no idea if it's about you personally generating? Or... You can answer both.
You can use BTC to make dollars. That's been like the number one killer app, and then you can use those dollars to buy chicken tenders and cocaine, which is useful. You can also use it to buy drugs online. That's been a staple as well. But that space is, or ransomware as well. But that space is primed to move to Monero, I think. So it may be that we lose that in some kind of transition. Or if not Monero, some other like privacy coin or something. I don't want to make it, slam dunk case for Monero here, but that I don't know how to tell the story of the space right now, if not by like reverting to obscure philosophy that people probably don't want to hear.
Okay, so Avi Eisenberg wants to know if you're making a comeback tour and if you still have your PayPay cash.
I don't think I'm planning a comeback tour. I think I came, I came and left. And any Pepe cash that I have, I definitely still have, if I have any. I don't even know. There's a lot of old wallets that I have that I keep untouched. Anything counterparty related would definitely be that.
Okay, moving on. At BitMe Please wants to know how's your luck with the ladyboys these days, and if you're still an S&P 500 maximalist, and to tell you that he misses you.
Aww. The ladyboys are the most interesting thing. It's really sad for society that happened, I think. But it is. And I don't know how the ladyboys are doing. I think about the ladyboys a lot, especially nowadays. I mean, this is their time. Like this is the year of the ladyboy. We have people in the federal government now who are riding that wave in very much the same way we rode Bitcoin. And they're in prominent places. You have the first men of the ladyboy, Joe Biden, in office. It's a very exciting time if you're a ladyboy. If we're talking about the ladyboys, I might as well slip it in here. I have met a number of ladyboys, and the thing I keep asking myself, what is going on here? What do these people have in common? And there's no one story for the ladyboy. There's the ladyboys come from all different walks of life, but I've noticed that in almost every case, these are people seeking authenticity. That seems to be a very common prerogative in that demographic. And I don't know what that says about society when the people looking for authenticity end up sort of dropping their gender. But I think that says more about society than it says about the ladyboys. I kind of think the ladyboys are almost just like some kind of I wonder what the ladyboys would have been in a prior society, and I don't think they would have been nothing. I don't think that they would have been normies either. I think that there's some type of person motivated by a need for authenticity that decides to give that a try, either out of desperation or some similar emotion. I'm skeptical that these people are as the pitch is very strange to me even still, that you are one gender in another gender body. Like I don't know or care if I pissed everybody off with that. It's a extraordinary claim. And I can't help but to think that that's a kind of post hoc rationalization for some feeling of inauthenticity that perhaps that's the Hail Mary pass of finding authenticity, and then they give it a try. And in some cases that works for reasons that are probably related to just the benefits of being a female in society. Like that in and of itself is a rewarding experience, not necessarily for everybody, but for certain types of people. If you're looking for dudes off the bat, but then on top of that, maybe you just like being treated like, you're a woman, which maybe that's the other side of it. Maybe as we deprecate women in society, that creates a power vacuum that people looking for authenticity can find is an easy place to set up shop. I don't know, but I think about it a lot, that's for sure. I don't know how the ladyboys are doing. That's my best thinking at the moment.
That was unexpectedly detailed. You seem to concern yourself a lot with this matter, so I suppose it was the right question.
I do. This matter, well, this is like an infracultural value from which so many things are dependent upon. I mean, you see this working its way even into building designs and infrastructure designs, apparel, on and on. So something very significant's going on there. I don't think we'll be able to tell what it is until like years later. But I'm skeptical that this is like an incidental thing. I think this is like a barometer or something, and I think it's a barometer of something in society. So we'll see. Yeah, I think about it a lot. It's just a very odd thing.
It might be a conspiracy of surgeons, but whatever. Let's not get into that. So Mr. Huddle says that he wants me to tell you that he says hello.
Tell Mr. Huddle I said hi. I hope he's doing well.
Yeah, right now he calls himself Steve Huddle. He's not just Mr. Huddle.
Oh, he's got a first name now.
Yeah.
Well, dropped his title.
So Paco at LawTemps11 wants to know what happened to Murad.
Remind me who Murad is. He was somebody who was on the show, no?
I don't know. If he asked, then you must be the one who knows.
Then I forgot. I don't know. Sorry to disappoint.
There was at Must Stop Murad.
The name vaguely rings a bell, but only vaguely.
I hope he's not listening.
Sorry, sir. If you're so,
Okay.
If you haven't changed your gender by now.
David Bennett wants to know if you're coming back to Twitter.
No, I don't like what happened there. I am not coming back to Twitter. It's not. I don't want to. Anybody else wants to spend time on Twitter? I think it's great, but like what's going on? What y'all are doing? I think, and by y'all I mean like me too at one point. So like it's not like a judgment. It seems like we're stuck in this cycle as a society with the media. People have talked about this at great length, so I don't want to like harp on stuff people have already heard, but we have strong opinions and stronger beliefs. These are morals that guide us. We see things clearly, and we see that the media doesn't see things clearly. So we head onto Twitter or some other social media site, and we begin to explain what it is that we see, and in the process, people do that to us as well. And in so doing, both people typically walk away with either a demoralization, an experience of like that which was holy or that which was moral is no longer of value. The other person having succeeded in convincing us that the thing that we were confident about was a mirage. Or if that action doesn't happen, then we decide that the other people are evil and that we must rid ourselves of them. And so either we block them for now, or we otherwise conspire to have them removed in some way from our lives. So this machine does that to us, and I think the easiest reason to understand why it does that to us is because of the complete and total lack of status and body language and experience. The lack of those things online create a very perverse environment. It's a very one-dimensional environment, at least metaphorically, if not literally, and it creates strange ways to view the world. Now, there are benefits. It's not all bad. I would suggest even like Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency space do, in fact, receive some moralization through this process. But the moralization of these financial products are themselves representative of the demoralization of the dollar. So it kind of builds upon the theory. There are clearly cycles in this process of moralization and demoralization that are happening, but the net trend is to zero on all fronts, I'm pretty sure. So, and I think even one of the reasons why even I'm stepping away is the language itself will get demoralized at the rate it's going, I believe, which we've already seen. Like we all know that the words are losing their meaning. So as people come to the internet with any kind of positive belief about things, I suspect those beliefs will be effectively erased from them, and that'll happen as a result of I think the needs of commerce as well as the needs of the people ponying up to the table who are not really aware of the sort of like Faustian bargain that they've entered into. It wasn't always this bad. It wasn't always this case, but I think this is a function of the medium as well as the literacy of the user, which has been going down and down and down and down, and I think will continue to go down given the current systems. Also, the nature of these social media systems are such that all rewards and penalties are exactly one-dimensional, even in the sense that they're like liked or upvoted or not, and that would remove nuance as a competing input into discourse. So we all know that like summary judgments are often inapplicable in any given situation. That's why we have like courtrooms. You know, we can say like thou shalt not kill or something, and everyone agrees to it. But then you have like this case of self-defense, and then we're all like, oh, okay, well that's an exception. And in any case, these sorts of nuances don't get handled by the on or off button that is promote or not promote. And so you end up with these battles for objectivity where there's effectively nothing of any concrete value over time, and it's not helping people, I think. So that's a long-winded answer for no. I'm not doing Twitter. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to be judgmental about anybody who's on Twitter exactly, because I know why you're there, and I know that the intention is good, but I think you're ultimately doomed. And it's not to say that the online world can't communicate or anything. It's just that these low-dimensional systems are going to fracture and atomize you from any kind of community that you think you value.
I think that explanation was slightly shorter than the one Greg Maxwell has made in regards to why he's not on Twitter, even though people suspect that he might be one of these anonymous accounts. But anyway, Buzz Space Out at Tulip Trust.
I know him.
Wants to know what's the thing in BTC now that you see that others won't see 6 months to come?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I have to say, I mean, I've been rendered a little cynical on Bitcoin. It's not that the problem we all have in Bitcoin is that we completely failed to decentralize, in my estimation. It's not anyone's fault exactly, because you can't, again, this is a social media thing, but you can't tell the difference between the map and the territory that is decentralization. Everyone will say decentralization, and they will be coming from a place of map. And then we look at what we see, and that territory is disconnected from the map. And so I see Bitcoin now as being engaged in a game of chicken with the regulators. That's just the stasis that we're in. So when you buy Bitcoin, the investment you're making is that you're going to sell Bitcoin before the regulators regulate Bitcoin to a significant degree. And unfortunately, that's what I see in Bitcoin. So one of the reasons I'm a little bearish on it, it's not that I don't have any Bitcoin, it's in my portfolio. I see that like this thing will grow and grow and grow until it takes over the entire world. I'm fully convinced of that. That potential is there. I mean, that's the hope, or that's the good news, take your pick. However, I don't see it getting to that point, because the opportunity cost of that success is going to be like the annihilation of the dollar. And everyone thinks that that's just going to happen, but I think that no, someone's going to put their foot down eventually and say, we're going to keep the dollar and we're not going to keep the Bitcoin. And at that point, because we fail to decentralize, we'll say, okay, because we have no power. It's not like we can mobilize a Bitcoin army, we can't mobilize Bitcoin exchangers, we can't mobilize anything, because the map is completely disconnected from the terrain. I guess you could even say like the state of Bitcoin Uncensored on YouTube is emblematic of that. We have said decentralization for 10 years now, and we have yet to have a decentralized YouTube. And it's just a little bit damning to me that at the center of decentralization is this profound emptiness of the execution of the message. So in many ways, this is like a map movement, not a terrain movement. And I don't know what that says in 6 months, but at some point the feds are going to move in, and they're going to restrict the liquidity significantly. They won't kill it outright, but they will kill it so much so that There'll be a rush to exit value. Some people will be successful, some won't, and then the liquidity of the product will be in the shitter, and the price will reflect that accordingly. It may stay in that stasis for another extended period, or that may be the death knell of the space. I don't know. I don't know if that'll happen in 6 months or in 6 years, but at some point that's going to happen, I think.
Right, so when you say that it's not decentralized enough, what kind of decentralization do you refer to? Because I'm pretty sure that the development side is pretty decentralized and spread across the planet in ways that you don't really have single points of failure. And in terms of nodes that are up there validating transactions, that's actually very good. And you have entire movements of people who buy nodes and altruistically run them, even though they're not making any money out of it. And you also have the Lightning Network, which is growing, and that's also very voluntary and also altruistic. I think one point of failure can be this mining industry where all of the operations converged in areas where the electricity was very cheap and it just happened to be in China. But we have seen already, I think it was like 3 weeks ago, the hash rate dropped like 20% or something in one day just because there was an outage in one region of China. So I have also seen that as a response to this, there are more initiatives from users to run mining rigs altruistically from home, as well as there are at least two American mining pools that have started operating and have become more prominent. And I think that this geopolitical game is getting started right now. And we're seeing how there's going to be an exodus from China with mining rigs, and they're going to go to some places which either embrace mining from an ideological or geopolitical point of view, or just because they believe in Bitcoin, or just because they can find cheap energy and they can convert to Bitcoin and bless you, and then convert to the almighty US dollar and, I don't know, live a lavishly luxurious life. Anyway, my point is that I think the centralization issue that you're mentioning, and correct me if I'm wrong, is actually that we rely too much on centralized services as on-ramps and off-ramps, like exchanges. And the average user doesn't care much about building a parallel economy. I suppose that back in your day, when you first started, there wasn't much. So I suppose you had what were the exchanges back then? You have Mt. Gox, you have Bitcoinica, and there was BitInstant, I think.
Okay, so if I can respectfully interrupt you, I suspect that the question, what is decentralization, is highly relevant here. There's a few ways to talk about this. This gets very postmodern, and so forgive me, but decentralization is this signifier that we float around, and what the signifier points to, the signification of the signifier, varies in every single person, apparently. For most people who have purchased Bitcoin, the answer to what is decentralization, the signification of that word decentralization, is Bitcoin. Meaning whatever Bitcoin is, that's what decentralization is. So any discussion we have would be post hoc from that equation. Meaning, everything you just said just now is a post hoc construction of an equivalence between Bitcoin and decentralization. I could instead, and there's nothing bad about that exactly. I mean, this is how the medium works. But I could say instead, the Amish are a great example of decentralization. These are people who, in times of stress, wouldn't even need currency. Say, they grow their own food. They maintain ties to other Amish networks, and on and on. They're self-sustaining, and these types of things. So the question of what is decentralization is worth discussing. We can look this up in the dictionary if you want, but that's probably not going to be acceptable to the audience or yourself. It's probably going to be a very vague thing. So in my estimation, decentralization is something that is independent of probably the dollar. That would be my answer, and this is just a specious answer, to be clear. It's just the one that I think makes sense given my comprehension of these words. And unfortunately, we have major weaknesses there with regards to even exchanging Bitcoin for goods and services, but also even other currencies. Like you started to talk about exchanges without perhaps even thinking that decentralization would mean there's a non-exchange model, which I actually think would be the case. I think a decentralized currency would be something more akin to what I've seen in like Buenos Aires, where you have this ad hoc network of people who are detached from the regulatory channels and who service people in the streets without much in the way of reporting or any kind of tie to monitoring systems and constraints. And there have been times when the network was significantly more aligned with this version of decentralization than now. So in the old days, while yes, the exchanges were around, they were certainly less coupled with the legacy financial system. And in addition to those exchanges were a significantly stronger pool of ad hoc messengers who would service people in their exchanging needs. So another way of looking at decentralization is probably the illegal drug business, which is so decentralized that they don't even need like copyrights or brand names or any of these like intellectual property related constraints in order to function. They don't have like stores. They're so decentralized that I think even during this pandemic, the federal government could not impose mask mandates or any of these types of operating business rules on that industry. And so for me, that gets at the core of the decentralization issues we have. There's some other incidentals around that, not least of which is that our communication channels are entirely controlled by a handful of very small companies, including Twitter and YouTube, who are entirely motivated to sell us things. Like when you see people on Twitter arguing, they're not arguing, they're buying products. That's what they're doing. And arguing is merely the way that they like to buy their products. So like even the discourse now has to go through these central agencies who are not aligned with our interests. Like they're happy to feed all kinds of negative behaviors so that you buy more Cheerios. And we have to deal with the consequences of that because we did not provide alternative systems that could mitigate that, as I see it.
I agree with you with this argument that we did not develop any sort of parallel economy to counter the dollar, but at the same time, how are you supposed to do that? Like, when you think about it, right now I'm playing the devil's advocate, so I don't necessarily agree with what I'm saying, but if you want to replace the dollar and you don't want to get arrested for it, you need to blend in at first, I think.
Well, you should consider in yourself that, like, the way you phrase that, like, how would you do that? First off, the universe doesn't owe you that solution. It may not be doable. That would be sad news. I don't actually believe that's the case, but it should be considered at least that's the way things have been for the last 100 years or so. We can look to see how people are doing it successfully. It's been much to my own chagrin that we have decentralization alive and well amongst the communists, which is very disappointing to me. Although it makes perfect sense because the communists have their own form of compensation that is at least offered in an egalitarian way. I'm skeptical that it would ever come to fruition, but amongst the believers, that's a solved problem. So, like, whereas with Bitcoin, we compensate people with Bitcoin returns. In like the communist crowd, they compensate people with utopian delivery upon the completion of the mission. So you end up with these crowds of black bloc people in the streets of Portland, I guess, who are destroying centralization in the form of the federal government buildings there. Like we can see decentralization working. I see that it's decoupled completely. Like that's the territory, as best I can tell. Bitcoin is almost entirely a map, and perhaps the map it no longer points to anything. In fact, there's a lot of theory that in the process of mainstreamification, all signs will end up pointing to themselves. Meaning, in the case of Bitcoin, Bitcoin points to Bitcoin and nothing else. It doesn't point to decentralization, it doesn't point to money, it points to Bitcoin. That explains a lot of the strange behaviors we see certainly. People who take to like religious convictions in the matter. It's similar to any other religion, which oftentimes points to itself and nothing else.
I think this went a lot deeper than the arguments of what decentralization is and the point that we were trying to make. Like, okay, your projection of the phenomenon is that it's going to end up pointing at itself, which is an interesting assessment. But at the same time, how does this help us figure out how we can improve Bitcoin to be more decentralized? Because I suppose that's where we started.
Well, you want Bitcoin to be more decentralized. I think the sad news is the average Bitcoiner does not want that. I think what happened is we're guilty of our own success. I think we have in fact pointed to ourselves, such that the average Bitcoiner either wants more Bitcoin or has some notion of wealth that is the only goal. And so any matter of decentralization is antithetical to that goal, because at the very least it would require that they do something and make a sacrifice, and that would not increase their wealth. It would decrease your wealth if you sacrificed for the signed Bitcoin. So
I can argue that this point of view is very American-centric. And
yes, it is.
By American, I mean North American-centric.
Agreed.
Because all of your onboarding experiences are custodial, and you have to deal with regulated stuff, and you have to KYC at every step. So I suppose that Uncle Sam has made sure that this threat of Bitcoin has been diminished and sucked out of its revolutionary spirit. But you have places around the world where people use Bitcoin to be free, and for the simple reason that they are either censored from the financial system, or they don't have access to it, or they try to escape some sort of authoritarian regime. And these are possibly the most interesting and motivating ideological components of Bitcoin that keep me going, because I realize that this has potential to help people around the world escape the kind of authoritarianism that they find themselves under. At the same time, I don't think I would be happy if there would be some sort of uniformization from the United States so that the experience would be the same all around the world, because that would suck. And sometimes I think that if we end up with Bitcoin just being in its current form, being adopted by governments, we're going to end up with a sort of experience where you have to declare your addresses and your wallets to your government, and it's going to be some sort of panopticon or something, where they know all of your transactions. And what good is it if it's censorship resistant if it's also not private?
Let me pause you right here. Hold a second. Someone's here at my house. They just need a bike pump. I'll be 2 seconds. I'll be right back. Stand by.
Golden Bitcoin, 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 golden Bitcoin.
Do you know what the world's oldest store of value is? Let me give you a hint. It's not Uncle Sam coin. It's not Lagarde coin. It's not Biden bucks. It's, that shiny rock that sometimes we like to make fun of just because Peter Schiff promotes it. But seriously, this is not financial advice, but if you think that there is a bear market that's coming and it's gonna hit us hard, and you want to preserve your purchasing power, then you should probably look into gold. Check out Vaultoro. It's the place where you can buy gold with your bitcoins, and then if the bitcoin price dips, you can buy more bitcoin instantly. Once again, not financial advice, but I think that gold is a better store of value than fiat or stable coins. Also, have I mentioned that Vaultoro stores their gold in Swiss vaulting facilities and everything is insured? Moreover, they can deliver the gold to your house. Find out more at vaultoro.com. There is no second sponsor, so special thanks to Evan Rose and to Vake for making donations to the show. So without further ado, let's get back to Chris Derose. He gave somebody a bike pump And now he's very pumped and ready to talk about his philosophy and his depression and everything else in between.
Well, okay, so where you left off was the US-centric comprehension of Bitcoin, and I agree that I have a very US-centric comprehension, and I also agree that that's not the best comprehension. Unfortunately, it's the highest market cap comprehension in all likelihood. So you're looking at these like stratospheric rises in the price, and that is entirely, as best I can tell, a function of increased regulatory encroachment by traditional finance actors here in the United States, the financial capital of the world, at least for now. So here's a question for you then, maybe. What is a non-Bitcoin model of decentralization that you see in either history or society today?
You caught me a bit off guard, so I'm gonna have to think about it.
Yeah. That's an important
I guess
question.
you also have to define decentralization, because we also have federations which have a little bit of autonomy by themselves.
You should, you should definitely get. It's not me that you owe that answer to. It's yourself, and so you don't have to be in any hurry to answer that. But you had some notion, like you don't have to be into Bitcoin because you're into decentralization. Like that's something that I have in myself that is a very important value. It's even a theme in my life outside of Bitcoin currently. It may be that the only reason you wanted decentralization is because you thought that's what Bitcoin did, and what you really want is for Bitcoin to work because that's what makes you money. So everything would then be like a post hoc construction in which decentralization is merely like one leg of the travel. Yeah, that's a bit of a complex comprehension. We can gloss over it maybe, but decentralization pre-existed Bitcoin. I look at society today, and I'm seeing centralization like I've never seen it before. I'm watching homogeneity build in the demos here in America. There is in fact a polarization, yes, but part of that polarization is two sets of homogeneous groups, or at least increasingly homogeneous groups. So while the two groups may not be homogeneous exactly, the adherents to each group are increasing in their increasingly homogeneous in their worldview relative to their peers of that group. So you find this is manifesting in strange ways in society, some of which we all probably know, like this very weirdo, at least seemingly weirdo to me. How to put it? I mean, critical race theory kind of stuff, where you have like these odd attitudes towards race that nobody ever believed until recently, and now everybody always believed it, that are part of this sort of tribe. And we also even have in like the corporate world, I'm seeing this odd centralization that's multifaceted, but like we've systematically destroyed a lot of small businesses here in my neck of the woods, but I think throughout the United States, as a response to this corona thing, which itself is like a very centralized idea that there's some ruler that can tell everybody in the world, or at least everyone in the country, that you need to start putting these face masks on. There's pressures in companies now at the managerial level, from what I've heard from others, wherein a lot of decisions are being increasingly made by management without any form of bottom-up input. It's just the dictates come, and the workforce is mobilized, and the workforce has effectively no power, so they just do things because they're getting a paycheck, and it's kind of mindless. And when a mind is required, since it's not really accessible to them, they kick the decisions upstairs, so that the managers have to deal with this, and then their managers. So it just creates this feedback loop of centralization, even in the companies. And so for me, that's a backdrop I'm seeing in society that I think is very, very unhealthy. We also see this even on the internet, where like all of the discourse is being throttled now by social media companies. This is relatively new in the internet world. We once had a time wherein personal websites and BBSs and these types of things were the standard. So yeah, I don't know exactly what to tell you there, but it's a little bit concerning if you're here for decentralization, decide what that looks like independent of Bitcoin, and then decide if we've made any progress either in the world of Bitcoin or outside the world of Bitcoin. And I suspect you'll come to the conclusion we've not made much progress there. I suspect. I could be wrong.
I can argue that I am here for the freedom part, and I came across the definition and my understanding of decentralization afterwards, but at the same time, these two concepts are so entwined in the case of Bitcoin that you can't really have one without the other.
I agree with that. I mean, the problems you have even with that, if you're here for freedom, like there's centralization pressures within Bitcoin that I haven't touched. Not least of which is the mining requirements. I think Monero has a far more decentralized approach to mining with the one CPU, one vote type of ethos. It hasn't quite manifested that way, but more so certainly in I think the Monero space than the Bitcoin space. You also have a very rigid team structure in the development side of things. Like I know people want to gloss over that because they want to make money, but if you want my opinion, it was far less controlling, 10 years ago than it is now. And I don't even think that's inappropriate. I actually don't really mind that, I guess, at this point. But it doesn't reek of decentralization at all. It reeks of centralization to me.
Okay. I got an error message and I had no idea what to do, so I pressed the button and it restarted the recording. So I have no idea. What was it that you were saying before this?
No, what I was saying was, as everyone post hoc rationalizes, they're going to justify ASICs because Bitcoin does it, not because decentralization does it. So, this is a trend that is continued at a brisk clip, and now we have a bunch of people mining on specialized hardware that is very hard to acquire in a decentralization sense, and which are geographically concentrated. We also have the Tether thing. Like I don't even know how to describe it at this point. I mean, it's the Tether scam as far as I'm concerned, but it's not even a scam because everyone's making money on it right now. So it'll be a scam, but it's not yet a scam. In any case, you have most of the liquidity in custody of this entity. If you start from a first principle of decentralization instead of a first principle of Bitcoin, I don't know that I would buy the case that Bitcoin is decentralized. The audience probably would if they were invested in Bitcoin. But if you took some of these arguments to like non-Bitcoin investors, their version of decentralization would probably not be compatible with some of the trends that I just described.
Yeah, but you just took it to the single point of failure and you pointed to some points of failure, but it doesn't mean that the network will stop mining blocks if somebody does something terrible to Tether or if something happens to ASICs. It only means that the price will plummet, and possibly if the price goes down, there's going to be a lot of people who will exit the space and realize that, they haven't made any money here, they've lost money, so it's not for them, they're out. But in the long term, I think that there's a lot of improvements to be made. I'm optimistic in this regard. And I think that the people who were into Bitcoin back in 2010, 2011, they are the ones who will be around even if it has no monetary value. So the network by itself is going to survive and outlive us, most likely.
If the network increases its decentralization is what I would suggest. So it's very interpretive here, but I'm not saying you return to Bitcoin as like a marker, which is fine. But I'm not saying that Bitcoin can't work if it's centralized, or that it won't produce money, or that it'll anything. But what I will say is that the centralization that has happened would potentially hit an apex, as I think you just described, from which it would rescind into a more decentralized model, if it's going to succeed. And if that is certain, then great. If that's not certain, then that would be a concern. But regardless of either of that, the point would be the same: is that you can see some mode of centralization of forces here that has transpired, I think. which was, I think, the answer to the question. Like Bitcoin has concentrated in its mining operators, its liquidity providers, and in its hierarchical managerial style, I think. It's not centralized in the sense that it is hit like the apex, but as a velocity that has been a direction that I've watched.
Yeah, on one hand, I can argue that you're right with the ASICs. Most of them are made by a handful of companies and you have to order them. And if you're not on some sort of priority list, you're not going to have them shipped in time. And it's likely that by the time they get delivered to you, they're going to be obsolete. And that's one possibility. But I've seen, for example, there's this guy in the United States who's making some sort of home mining ASICs, which are very energy efficient. And you buy them and you run your own operation from home.
You're kind of missing the point. There was once a time when ASICs weren't relevant. And so you didn't have to have a relationship with anybody in order to mine. And
well,
so
you required some sort of video card or processing unit, and you can argue that these are also made by a handful of companies, and there is some failure to be had there.
I agree with that, but those are commodity products. I could go to a store, and I could pay in cash money. I don't have to find as specialized a provider, and I don't have to have a relationship with that provider. So it's not to say, you don't misinterpret it. It's not to say that there's like doom or that there's an abject failure. It's, at least from my vantage point, a direction that we've headed in. And we could head in the opposite direction at any point, but we couldn't head in the opposite direction unless we saw that this was a direction we were headed in and agreed that this was a direction we didn't want to go. But it should be said that the direction we've headed in this direction, be it centralized or otherwise, that it has been very profitable. And one of the concerns I have, this is particularly when I look at like the Portland crowd, is that any form of financial integration is seemingly rendering our decentralization difficult. And I can't tell if it's like a legacy integration or if it's finance in general. I think it's the legacy integration, though. That's what I think. Meaning, like, because we're operating with the dollar, we are now beholden to centralization rules.
Yeah, there are not many people who think in these terms, but now I know why. When I asked Wampus on Twitter, what should I use for home mining, he told me that the new generation of AMD processors is very promising and has like 24 cores or something, which is insane. And if you get that one to mine, it's gonna be as efficient as an older ASIC, but at the same time, it's very expensive. You pay like $1,000 for that processor. So I suppose we will be getting there eventually. Maybe that at some point the processing market is going to get better than the ASICs.
I don't want to be a Monero shill. I truly don't. I just that it's a great example for me, in part because I'm familiar with it, but also because it's a great example. So like why wouldn't we just switch to random X for Bitcoin? Like let that be an open question. Why, if this is if what you just said is a desirable outcome wherein you can buy a CPU and that is something you can mine with, why wouldn't we just switch Bitcoin to random X?
Well, that would require a hard fork, and that's very undesirable.
Well, who told you that was undesirable? Because you just told me that was desirable. You can see how that's intractable.
I can argue that we also have confidential transactions which are very desirable, and I would very much want them. But do you want to split the community and take the risk of not migrating the entire user base to the new chain, which uses a different type of parameters?
You're missing the point. I agree with everything you just said. You don't want to split the community. But that's besides the point. The point that I was making was that the path of the desire as articulated is at an impasse for many good reasons. We can argue why now you don't want the thing you just told me you wanted, and that's fair. But any argument, or I should say argument, any conflict in opinion that we have under that term, it would very quickly turn into a Bitcoin as first principle discussion. So like this is very much a problem with language as a whole. Like I don't know where we're going to take this interview. Like I apologize to the audience in advance, but like I've started to see fundamental issues in the language that are created principally by the internet that prevent us from having objectivity. So in many ways, like we're using an inferior tool to decide what it is that we want, and that in and of itself is a big cause of problems. So like who decides what Bitcoiners want off the bat? It should be an indication of how centralized this has gotten. If we talk to the Amish community, my suspicion is that there's a council, there's a process, there's trust, there's all of these IRL forms of sentiment mitigation that are available to the Amish because they aren't using this broken tool that we have to use. And because of that, they're probably going to be more decentralized. I think this is to a lesser extent also true for the Portland crowd, the Black Bloc people, because those people meet in person, so they also have some of these tools. You know, I don't know that we want to go in those directions, but that's nonetheless the play field, I think.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree because Monero, in order to remain resistant to ASIC mining, it has to hard fork every now and then.
Yes.
So that means that there is some sort of coordination and they respect the leadership of a few developers and they say, this is the real network. We're going to follow it no matter what. And that establishes a single point of failure that I suppose is undesirable for everyone in the Bitcoin space. Like you can essentially take out these, if you're a government, you can assassinate these developers. And then how do you know that the network is gonna keep on getting maintained by anyone?
So Bitcoin forks often, and it is hard forked on a number of occasions. And I recognize that has entered the memory hole and that's been gaslit to the extreme.
Yeah, I know. There was the inflation bug and there was also the accidental hard fork in 2013.
Right, okay.
But
so
those were the early days. Like you have to convince everyone, including exchanges, including users, independent node runners. You have to convince them to move to the new network. And that's going to be hard. You have to convince miners to move to secure that new chain. How are you going to do that? There needs to be a transition. It doesn't just happen, you know, this is a good idea, let's move on to it.
I think that at least in myself, I've rendered that concern objective, mostly by watching what has happened in the Ethereum community. And there's a combination of inputs that can make that consensus very easy. First and foremost, the exchanges will, I mean, this has been something I've said for a long time. Nobody likes to hear it, but the ticker symbols are the most powerful position in the space, and the exchanges, by way of an opaque consensus, have complete and total control over that. So we don't know the process by which the exchanges hold this consensus, but my suspicion is that they sit at a dinner table and they discuss it. And if all the exchanges decided tomorrow that the Federal Reserve is the arbiter of the Bitcoin Core repository, my strong suspicion is that all the miners would immediately jump to that consensus. Suspicion, don't really know. But even if we didn't have that angle, I think the miners are so beholden to their own variable capital obligations that they're just going to choose whatever is the most liquid, no matter what. Like that's their prerogative as a mining operation. So it's tough to say, but I think it's probably, in my mind, again, an objective, an objectively handled concern at this point, which is that wherever the money is flowing with the exchanges, that's where the one true real ticker symbol will be, regardless of any manifestation of ideology. Like, yeah, I mean, that would be the takeaway here. The ideological values are irrelevant, I think. I think all of the ideology is a matter of posturing at this point. And it exists to get you to have confidence in the product, but it has no bearing on the product's outcome, which, by the way, is not a very decentralized process. If the power you have is to be effectively a slave, like you have the power to do whatever you want so long as it's in the master's interests, and at the end of the day, master gets full control. Then like you don't. This is why democracies were born. Like you're not very free, and you don't have any power. So and like I don't know that we want Bitcoin to be a democracy, if that needs to be said, but I don't think that the rhetorical angle is consistent anymore with regards to dicing up how things would play in any hard fork versus non-hard fork model. I think that that's objectively ascertainable. Looking from what we've seen both in Bitcoin and around Bitcoin when these issues have come to the fore.
I mean, you can look at Bitcoin Cash, right? You can argue that they have made the least contentious of modifications. They kept the same mining algorithm so they could get a part of the miners. They increased the block size so that they could fit more transactions into the blocks. And I suppose that was desirable to a part of the community back in 2015, 2016, 2017. And in August 2017, that's when it finally happened. But you look at it and it did not succeed specifically because it had so many points of failure. And it did not have the development and the community support.
Well, it didn't have the ticker.
It did not have the same network effects.
I think it didn't have the ticker. I think that to me, it was unable to convince the exchanges that it was the ticker BTC. And thus, that everything else you just described was the fallout of that inadequacy. It may also, so like if you don't mind stepping back a bit, like another way to, the internet as a whole is a mirror. Like you really have to consider it in this way. And I say it's a mirror in the same way that like your mirror works in your room. The mirror is itself a two-dimensional object. It is a square, and it projects depth. Like you can look at this square on your wall, and you can see depth. But the depth isn't there. It's a mirage. If you try to look around a corner, you won't have success. And this is true as well for like the internet. Like if you're playing a video game, you know full well that what you see on your screen has no effective depth. It's a 2D projection of a 3D coordinate system, but all elements that weren't needed to make the impression were removed. All the faces were culled, and a bunch of complex math was done to ensure that the only parts you saw are the parts that were computed. And I think in many ways the internet's like that. We come to the internet and we have a limited understanding of the world. The internet is at this point designed under the mantra that the customer is always right. So like you have this very limited comprehension. You want to see yourself in the mirror maybe, and so it'll show you from the best angle, and then you buy products and everybody's happy. But then it's weird when it comes to like shared communal values. So here, anybody listening, and you yourself, lad, can decide what it is Bitcoin is, but it may just be that Bitcoin is an unincorporated company, and that the mirror presents Bitcoin in all of these lights that we want to see it in, but that it is a company and it is incorporated, albeit not with the United States government, with some sort of odd customer is always right posturing of the exchanges. Like that's their value in the market, is to posture these things in a way that doesn't show the company on any federal government paperwork, weirdly. And if that's a model that you can consider, I think Bitcoin Cash becomes the company that Roger Ver offered in this Bitcoin world. Whereas Core is the company that at this point is Vanderleen. I don't even know how to pronounce his name. It's his company, I think. And for the mirror to operate, he can't be seen. He needs to be like a cold polygon, and everyone will agree to that because they're right. They're customers, and they came to this mirror looking to see what they saw, and so you can't discuss that. That's kind of how I see this space now. I don't know if that's a buzzkill.
You know that lib Bitcoin exists, right?
Yes. However, Okay, so this is an old discussion as well. The problem you have, this discussion about Live Bitcoin has been going on since I want to say 2013 or so. One of the mistakes we made in Bitcoin, in my opinion, is to not decentralize in the way that HTTP decentralized. So when you talk about Live Bitcoin, I would suggest that it's irrelevant because the implementation is the spec, meaning whatever Bitcoin Core does, that's what the spec is. And there's reasons why that has to be the case that Peter Todd, you can look up his discussions on, and he's very accurate there. But we could at least performed better. But anyways, if we had a spec that was Bitcoin, then Live Bitcoin, yes, could have I think in my mind be a viable juxtaposition here. But because Live Bitcoin is based on Bitcoin Core and will always be a post hoc construction based on Bitcoin Core, I don't think it's an example of decentralization. I think it's an example of like a minion following the leader. I think.
Well, you can run any kind of software which respects the base rules of the network, the consensus rules.
Yeah.
And for example, you can refuse to adopt SegWit, and you can run your own node on an old version of Bitcoin QT or something that precedes the establishment of Core per se in its name right now. So you're still going to be able to run Bitcoin if you respect the core rules. I can even write my own code right now in C++ or Rust or something and be able to synchronize to the blockchain as long as my client respects the rules about what Bitcoin is in terms of supply and verification and pretty much what goes on in the network. As long as I am on the right path and I respect the rules, I think this is a very Republican principle.
Okay, so this is, I used to say this on Twitter, this is why I think the Bitcoin.Foundation is the one true real Bitcoin, and that SegWit is in fact a vendor extension. I'm happy to go with this theory, but then the problem you're going to have is why is there any vendor extension to the Bitcoin.Foundation, which would serve as the one true real Bitcoin, or would be the standard by which all Bitcoin nodes would be expected to run. If you don't know what the Bitcoin.Foundation is, it is in fact the original Satoshi code with very minor adjustments. And it's in more or less complete consensus with the protocol as designed, but not as extended. And that's a little esoteric, but you're going to end up finding that your beliefs on all these issues have not formed independently, but have been downloaded from a center. Effectively, the Bitcoin Core Center, core being a synonym for center, is very ironic to me. I don't think they're evil. I think they're very well intended. I just think that their community management is bizarre, and like it's done well. So like, who cares what I think? But you're going to try and square a circle, I think, on any type of comprehension of Bitcoin that isn't top down, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's take Bitcoin.Foundation.
Yeah.
Is it maintained? Is there anyone who's taking care of the code?
Yes, Trilemma.
Yeah, right. And he's still, actually, I think he's still running that, and he's still in sync with the rest of the network, which is very nice. And this goes back to the argument that you don't actually need core. You just need to respect the basic consensus rules.
Well, yes, except that there are any number of extensions that will render you unable to work with certain people. And so, like, the question is, who is the non-Bitcoiner, the one that is out of consensus, that has the optional extensions, or the one that doesn't? And then you have these weird, like, these oddities where, like, the inventory now moves out of consensus because the exchanges impose that on us. Meaning, like, all the Bitcoin Core extensions, which are good extensions. I don't think they're bad. I think that they're extensions. And the question is, well, why would you leave consensus if not, because the exchanges make us? I think you're gonna find yourself in a tough position where you have to explain emergent consensus, as somehow differing from like the emergent consensus that we see in North Korea. It's very emergent in North Korea. Like Kim Jong-il like says what it is we've always believed, and we've always believed it, and it emerges. It's like a very decentralized miracle, but that's kind of an unconvincing story to me.
I'm going to argue that just because you have these options and you can add or remove the extensions and still be in sync with the rest of the network, even though you cannot transact with some parties with taproot addresses or something, that is one proof of decentralization. That is one example of sovereignty. You can choose to either run that code or not, but you can be on the same network and you can transact with the people who use the same type of addresses as you do.
Not always. So the addresses do differ, and you have issues like with Lightning and such. So not all people. If it stands as an example of decentralization, then that's great. I think that's fine and good. I don't know that I don't know that I'm buying it. Here's another thing you have to ask: like, how is it that we emergently consense? Maybe, like, what is the process by which we come to collective agreement? Because I think that is a very top-down thing. I find it very difficult to believe that anyone is even competent enough to understand the majority of the technical decisions. I think that most people just download it.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment that most people download it, and most people don't verify the PGP addresses and may just download malware. And there's a lot that people do when they trust some organization, so I can agree with that. But at the same time, when it comes to decision making, like, I'm not sure if you followed the trial to activate Taproot and all the debates that happened between the developers.
These are old. The debates, half the time the debates I think exist to convince people Bitcoin is real. But that's another tangent we don't have to get into. But I have been following some of them.
The main idea is that you can do it either. You have these three big stakeholders. You can have basically the developers become the dictators who may or may follow the best interests of the network. You can have the miners get more power by activating software themselves, which is what's happening right now. Or you can have more than 90% of user nodes doing the same stuff that miners do. And the way that we have done it right now is that miners have signaled Taproot by updating the client that they're running. There is an over 90% majority right now, so it's going to get activated at the end of this cycle, but it gets deployed in November. So this is the way that they have chosen to do it, by allowing miners to take control of whether or not we accept to run this code. Just because miners are, how should I put it, more active, they have more skin in the game. I think that's a way of defining it. There were a lot of community members who disagreed, like Francis Pulio. I remember he was very vocal and he called us all a bunch of cucks for agreeing to let miners... Yeah, he's very honest. For agreeing to let miners take charge of it. I would have preferred myself to update the node software, but there is still trust involved, okay? So we like to talk about decentralization and don't trust verify. We trust the code, especially if we're not qualified and we have no expertise in the field. We have to trust to some degree. We have to trust either the developer or the auditor or the expert
in Bitcoin
who gets paid.
Trust, though. Like, who do we trust with gold, for example, when there's consensus issues with gold?
You have to trust some sort of verification process, which guarantees that you have enough atoms in that rock.
Yes, that's and fair and agreed. But I think that it's the deferring of consensus to non-humans that is probably a distinguishing feature of what gold's decentralization mechanism was, if not it is currently.
I would argue that gold is a lot more centralized.
Well, I don't even know that I disagree with that. I at this point, I mean, you have a system that I don't think I disagree with. You have a system that's increasingly centralized in society. I mean, this is in terms of my own personal like existential issues at the moment, which are very minimal but hit around here. It's effectively this: is that everything that I thought we were going to try to avoid has occurred, including the decentralization of gold, and my estimation, Bitcoin. Maybe I'm being unreasonable, but I do see decentralization in snippets, and it's. I mean, this is a slight change of topic, but like, you call me on a day that's kind of interesting. I'm actually moving my house right now. I'm leaving my home with mixed feelings. I have a few homes. This is one of them. This is a primary residence, and I'm trying to decrease my footprint here in America. I'm not going to leave America just yet, if at all, but I was going to take one foot out the door and start looking around to see if I can find something else. And one of the reasons is because I see these centralization pressures affecting us here in ways that I suspect will be antithetical to my own prosperity over time, and probably society's prosperity over time. And I think that what decentralization is going to look like is going to be people doing stuff, which I don't see a lot of in Bitcoin. I see a lot of talking in Bitcoin. I don't see a lot of doing stuff. And a decentralized community might very well look like something that's more farming oriented. It's not the place we wanted to end up at. I get that. I don't even know that I want that. I think I might just say like, okay, you know what, Florida's better, centralization, so be it. But I call it an existential issue because it's very uncomfortable to resign myself to this. And so this is kind of tangent. Like I said, I'm going to look elsewhere and see what I find. This whole thing had just been a stupid idea to decentralize anyways, maybe. But who knows? Maybe I see it somewhere. And then I think, okay, I have to take, if I'm going to decentralize, I have to take action in that manner.
If you're a basic Twitter LARPer, you would have phrased it like, I have just read The Sovereign Individual and I had an epiphany.
Okay, fair. I've not read The Sovereign Individual, and I have not had an epiphany. I think I've read a lot of books, and I lament the forces that I understand. I understand them, I think, and I lament that. So it's not really a place of like enthusiasm. It's a place of reluctance. But like not in a way
I feel like it's unfortunate that we ended up having that core debate, which gets nowhere, because there's so much great stuff to discuss with you.
Yeah, I don't really care if like your faith hinges on this matter with core, then don't listen to me. I'm okay with that. Like I don't have to change your mind. That's totally cool. If you want my opinion, I'll give it to you, and that's what it was. That's where I ended up. So like maybe what you will find is in your journey, you are looking at the mirror. You are looking at a mirror. You're right now listening to this, whoever you are. You are performing the audio equivalent of looking at yourself in the mirror. Right now, you're probably doing an exemplary job by internet standards of like not rendering yourself a consumer. But at some level or another, like Vlad has to pay for a studio and has to syndicate audio, and so.
No, I live in mom's basement. I'm fine.
Well, are you though? Because, I mean, like, no matter what you do, you're going to be constrained. It's okay. Like, this is like productive. You're going to have to compromise for society. But I think what gets weird with the internet is that the entirety of your show is probably a Bitcoin post hoc. Like, no offense, like, but like the totem that we're circling around is Bitcoin, and your obligation, if you're going to be heard by anyone, is to reify this totem, is to make it real and good. Like I think that's good. I would much rather have anybody doing that than not. But it gets very one-dimensional for similar reasons to how you play a video game. It ends up becoming very two-dimensional, but you take a three-dimensional world and you reduce a lot of information in order to render it on a screen. Like that's also an artifact of the internet onto the listener and onto the show production. You got to understand that most people are buying, like even right now with like Bitcoin as a totemic belief, like that's a kind of consumerism. We're all listening to the show because we want confidence or have confidence or want to make others confident. So like if the customer is always right, we can post hoc construct an entire universe around anything, any belief. If you want to believe that like cats are a currency and you can manage to sell that want to people, then that could become a show, and we would construct a universe around this totem. Humans are morally ambiguous. I'm pretty convinced. So at least on the internet they are, and so that perverts a lot of like truth discovery. I think. I could also just be 100% completely wrong, and that's fine. That would be very comforting to me at this point.
I mean, I feel a bit offended because I'm no salesman. I'm not trying to provide anyone with self-assurance that they're investing in, the right place. I'm just trying to help people understand how any of this works. And I'm pretty sure if there were enough points of failure for this to be shut down, it would have been by now. And there are lots of incentives to shut it down by lots of malevolent or, depending on your point of view, benevolent actors. So, let's just end this argument about whether or not we like to...
You yourself are buying right now. Like you can't discount yourself as a content producer as also being a consumer. Like you may very well be engaged in the process of selling yourself Bitcoin at this moment. And that the show is a manifestation of that. So I'm not accusing you, or at least it's not my intent to accuse you of being in some way a bad actor. If anything, you're probably doing a great job acting. In fact, if there's any foul, it might be that it's just that we're all acting on this medium. But that's not a real foul to me. And I've done it. Like I sold myself Bitcoin. Like maybe that is just what I did in the driver's seat, and I'm superimposing that onto the others. But I think there's at least some kernel of truth there. And if it needed to be said, like this is maybe a lot of money, and this is maybe a lot of happiness, and this has brought a lot of hope to people's lives. So it's not like it's just a maniacal plot. These are, if there's a maniacal plot, it's probably like the internet. But even that, I don't think these things. In my mind, a lot of this stuff is just amoral. That's also what gets me in trouble too. Is that I'm not taking like a moral stance on these things, but it's brought a lot of peace to my life. That's for sure.
I think you're overanalyzing it.
I am. This is another reason I'm stepping away from the internet. I gotta say, this notion of the overanalyzing or I deal with this a lot. I know where it came from. I understand why that's a valid concern. But what ends up happening is that as we bow to that pressure of the overanalyzation, we render ourselves imbecilic. And that what'll happen is like I'm overanalyzing with you. And then maybe like you take some part of this, and then it maybe registers some new comprehension or something. But then like the etiquette of dumbing things down ends up becoming the prevailing etiquette. So now you go ahead and try to express some greater concept that has truth, and you would be beholden to the same etiquette. And I think what ends up happening is a kind of a cultural degeneration, wherein we all have to revert to very denominational comprehensions in order to communicate, thus reducing comprehension. So I think there's actually measurements on this. Like you can see the language deteriorating in its complexity because of this type of etiquette. I don't blame anybody. Everybody wants this, but it's a concern for me. I aspire to be a father, I guess, as part of that. Like that's a major personal goal, and it's also a sort of perversion in a lot of these matters. But like when I think of the kind of world I want my child to be in, I don't want that child to be in a world where overanalyzing is immoral. There's no reason why that's a better opinion, but it's at least conducive with the aspirations I would have as a father to share with the child the delta between like contemporary comprehensions and perhaps more academic, scholastic, and cerebral comprehensions of society, and that doesn't come from a place of like morality. That's a form of keeping your mental health, I think, in check.
Okay, so you said something which I think is unfair. Like you said, you don't want your unborn child to grow up in a world which deems overanalyzation as immoral. Like I never said that the fact that you overanalyze is immoral. I just implied that it stands in the way of your own happiness. And you explained prior to my argument that you sold yourself to Bitcoin and you regard all of these moments as something which possibly most likely had some sort of impact to the world. But at the same time, I just think that it was everyone's free will to listen to you. It was everyone's free will to believe in you if there was anything that you said. And the fact that you let these actions of yours consume your existence, it's just overanalyzation which stands in the way of your own happiness. So sorry for playing the shrimp here, but shrink, not shrimp.
No, that's all valid. I try to stipulate that these are like personal, these are very like individualistic priorities, concerns. So like the overanalyzation, if it was intended, to create peace on my end, I don't work that way. And it's not that you're wrong. It's just that in my own life, I have found that the examination offers peace. I find comfort in the ambiguity, and it's very esoteric. I know it's a very rare comfort in society. Most people want simple solutions to complex problems, and yeah, I just have to figure out who this poor child could just be like a total normie who has no interest in a lot of the stuff that I have, and it's jumping ahead on a lot of these things. But I remember when I was younger, a different world, and in particular, and the audience can ask themselves if this was their world. I don't know if this is just my own journey, but I remember there being environments where overanalyzing was the goal, and I don't seem to find myself in those environments as I get older, and that I don't know what there is to say about that. If that's a fashion, that was a fashion, or that is a fashion now to remove the old fashion, or if that's a function of age, or if that was like a utopian environment I found. I don't know. But before this, I will say, before this conversation started, you asked me how things were in the early days of Bitcoin. And I do think that the etiquette of overanalyzing was more mainstream. I do think that the reading comprehension has diminished, both in terms of the reader's ability and the writer's ability to express. So some of this does hearken to those older days, either in Bitcoin or outside of it. I don't know. If the audience wants to comment somewhere, I'd be curious to see what people think about that.
You can tell them how they can contact you if they want to comment.
No, I'd rather. I don't know that I even care. I have respectfully, I have a degree of a consensus in my own mind that I've grown happy with. I mostly would see if the audience wants to discuss with themselves how they feel. You see this the hot take thing that I've done plenty of, and we all do because it grows your following. A hot take is what people want to hear, and if you offer the nuance, you just don't get as many retweets or likes. So the hot takes are usually very simple,
Yeah, I know what you're saying, so let me unpack a bit. So I'm a lot younger than you are. I'm not sure how much younger, but at least 10 years.
I'm turning 40 in 6 months, so some of this too is the...
I'm turning 30 in 8 months, so
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. When I started university in 2011, we were told at the time that there is nothing in this world that cannot be debated in the academic space, and that everything was interesting enough to be debated. And we would have long debates about everything, including race, gender, and all of that stuff. After 2015, 2016, we started getting lists of topics that we're not supposed to talk about, or just talk about from one point of view, from one angle, or else it's offensive. And if it's offensive, I think this had more to do with the economic interests of the institution than the actual academic endeavor. So they just wanted to virtue signal on one hand, and on the other hand, they wanted to get as much money from these oppressed groups through scholarships and all sorts of ways in which they were getting to that point. So I think that there's a greater movement in society which makes us dumber and makes us have fewer debates and leads to more polarization, more radicalization. And then you made the argument about Bitcoin getting dumber. And you have to look at the kind of articles that were being written in 2012, for example, and what kind of audience they had. And now you take a look at CoinDesk and you're going to open their latest news, And you're going to see that they only have bullet points, and that's all. They don't even have conventional journalism anymore, because they figured out along the way that this takes less time to write, and it gets more clicks because people don't really care about reading. So they're going to look at the headline, they're going to look at the main arguments and bullet points, and that's it. That's like the packaged, the minimalistic way of delivering the news. There is no nuance, there is no editorial input. It's just the information there in its very raw state that you have to digest and comprehend by yourself. And this is where we are at. And I suppose that this is natural when something becomes mainstream, because in the beginning, whoever was crazy enough to believe in Bitcoin had to be either educated and see something beyond this crazy internet code which generates internet money, or else be completely insane. You have these extremes, like why would you believe in Bitcoin in 2010? You had to either be very smart and understand the code, or else just be idealistic to the point that you're insane. Now it has become very safe. Like, I believe that everyone who got in the last 3 or 4 years just basically enjoyed the hard work of those that were in before them and have made it very safe. And there is mainstream adoption. You have S&P 500 companies that invest in Bitcoin today. You have mainstream media coverage, which is constant, and they just have to go to the lowest common denominator when they explain everything. Plus, there is this unprecedented situation with inflation, and there is a lot of irrationality, and there is this TikTok investment phenomenon, where you have just someone who is 16 and does TikTok videos where he shows stickers, and people are gonna start buying that by virtue of being followers, which, I don't know, nobody does any fundamental analysis of anything anymore. They don't care. They just, it's back to the Derose Laws, right? With the number go up, and you're going to say that you're not the one who came up with that, but you're the one who made it popular.
Well, it's good to know that I made an impression there. I mean, everything you just said attests to the same playfield that I'm seeing. So you may want to look into what mainstreamification is, and then ask yourself if Bitcoin has in fact fell victim to that process, because it, you see this even with things like Black Lives Matter, where in becoming mainstream, it often loses its appeal on anything other than commerce. It could be that mainstreamification renders all ideological values moot in the pursuit of profit. It may be that that's the loop we're stuck in, perversely even in the sense of Bitcoin, because it's like very self-referential when you're producing profit in the form of a different currency that is. I mean, it's just, we don't have to get into that, but it's something that the audience should at least consider what mainstreamification is, it means, and how it affects consensus. That might also be an important point here too. Like, this consensus issue in Bitcoin extrapolates all throughout society. One of the things I love about Bitcoin, this is a slight tangent, but Bitcoin really is a metaphor for greater issues and themes in society. And I suspect that there's a gigantic kernel of truth in a lot of the Bitcoin rhetoric, particularly, as you mentioned, looking at inflation, and probably in the reverence for the dollar declining. It may end up being like what we monetized was demoralization of the dollar, and that was the kind of product we offered. I don't know that that's true, but when you mainstream these things, it gets very perverse. It no longer signifies anything other than some sort of like cures whatever ails you appeal, which we've seen in the space. Like that's how we ended up here. It makes your job hard as a show producer because, and you see this, the people who have denominational values that are probably completely uninteresting are going to be the ones that get the bajillion views. And then you're in an odd position where you can offer a lot of value, but because it's not banal, you're going to be unheard. And then I don't know what that does to a quote unquote community, but I think it means that there is no community anymore, is what unfortunately that would mean, left unabated. You know, let's say you had, let's just reduce the size of the space to like, I don't know, 100 people. And let's say 10 of those people were around in 2011 and 90 of those people were around after 2015. You can ask yourself what happened to the ideology in that group of 100 people, because the 10 people that were there first will be completely removed by the other 90 people who, like you said, built upon the thing that the first 10 people did, but have no obligation to continue listening thereafter, or understanding even. It's a big problem.
Yeah, you reminded me of something else which has happened in another shitcoin where they had some sort of Lord of the Flies kind of situation at some point.
Oh man, Vlad, everything's going to end up that way, I think. I think about that a lot. I think even as a society, we have to really think hard about what we're doing, because, what is this? This was like warned against by some of the libertarian guys, if not like omni bellum omnis, omni bellum omnis contra bellum omnium contra omnes, I guess. Thomas Hobbes. The war of all against all. That is kind of what's going on in society, I'm seeing. We're all atomizing, and that will increasingly create Lord of the Flies coalitions. It's not unavoidable, but it's increasingly common, you know? I mean, the coalitions that are being created right now are very strange. Like, if you think of, this is definitely a tangent, but I think there's a Bitcoin lesson here, so bear with me. Think of the Republican Party as a coalition force. I know this is political, but just in terms of, like, without your feelings again, like, look at what the coalition looked like in the 90s or the 80s, and then compare that to today. Today, the coalition is this kind of, like, conspiracy type. I don't begrudge that, even like it, but it's very weird that somebody who is, like, anti-fluoride has coalition potential with somebody who is, like, a UFO enthusiast, and that's the nature of the coalition. Very strange. The bond there is going to be kind of weak, I think, and it's going to be very denominational. But it's all we have now. And on the left you have similar coalitions, weirdly, around, like, all the stuff we think of. But these coalitions, even in, like, the office environment, even in the family environment, are increasing. So in some senses, like, a lot of my critique of Bitcoin is only because we live in a society, and Bitcoin is in fact emblematic of great themes at work, because we all know it, but also because it happens to be at the point of the spear. One could argue that the current inflationary environment was the manifestation of the concerns of the Bitcoin crowd. It's, or maybe the Tea Party crowd, but there's a lot of carryover. So, I don't know what that really says, but we're, as a society, heading towards that. I'd like to say that makes us more decentralized, but I don't actually think it does. I think it does the opposite. I think it makes us, every person, powerless, unfortunately, comparatively. But there are a lot of contradictions in there.
It's funny, because when we first started, actually before we started recording, you told me that spite is the most powerful force in the world.
Right now, yes.
And that's what ends up to these unlikely coalitions, where you have the anti-fluoride person getting allied with the person who believes in UFOs, just because they have a common enemy and they perceive that their differences are insignificant in comparison to the threats that they perceive from that common enemy. But at the same time, this is kind of like radicalization. It just leads to a belief in something that you don't necessarily believe in, just because you think that the other guy is a lot worse and you're fighting against something that can turn out to be terrible.
Absolutely. Well said. Spite is a force. It's not the best force, It's got a lot of costs. And it seems like the internet is making all of us very spiteful. I mean, earlier in the interview, for example, I offended you by suggesting that you would be some kind of shill, roughly. I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me if I misstated the offense. Respectfully, I don't know that I care. I think I'm like post-offense now. I'm not proud of that. It's just that I have found so much offense out there that I am offense fatigued, and I've just rendered it an object of inspection, like a cup or something. It doesn't have a lot of meaning. I myself have found myself demoralized even in the most basic of human emotions as a result of internet contentions. It's a very toxic environment, I think, that we're creating with the internet, and I don't think we can remove the internet. I don't think we should remove the internet, but I don't have solutions either, except for there is a great solution that nobody likes, and that solution is to probably separate yourself from the internet voluntarily and find what it is you're looking for on the internet in meat space. And that's a bitter pill. It's where I'm at, out of desperation, candidly. I don't know that that's going to work. It's where I'm at. So that's why I'm sharing it here with you today. You may have a solution that you guys have thought of. If so, share.
It makes a lot of sense. Plus, I suppose you've seen a lot, and it must be terrible living in the United States.
No, it's not terrible. No, this is where I wanted to call home. I love most of America. I enjoy all of America. For me, I'm moving into a different phase of my life where I want a child, and that changes a lot of my priorities. It also changes my time preference a lot. So I've got to think a lot about the direction we're headed in for a young man. And it has less, while I can live out my retirement perhaps in complete and total tranquility in America, I think that the environment for performance in many ways would be detrimental to a young man's interest. So now I have to weigh the concerns of this prospective person into my life in a way that's causing me to act differently than I otherwise would. Florida's great. Florida's like the America I wanted to live in, and I do, and it's awesome. The problems I think we're going to have in America relate to the federal issues and not local issues, and then, my aspirations for a child would be at the federal-ish level. Part of what I'm planning on doing is taking some anthropological surveys of varying areas. I'm not an anthropologist, but I've read a few books. I've got some ideas of what I'm looking for in terms of a habitat environment for like a budding human. I have concerns about the English language, and my hope is that I can learn another language, and that another language would solve some of the problems in the English language. I'm hopeful for Spanish. I think French actually would probably even be a better language still, but I don't want to live in France. So there's a lot of Spanish countries I would consider living in. So I'm hoping that I can find what I'm looking for in Spanish, and at least for 10 years or so.
Oh, you should talk with Francis Pulio. You said you like him.
I do.
He recently moved into the jungle or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's decentralizing. That's the thing. And he may have decentralized too much too soon. But I get the sentiment. I really do. I have a lot of friends who are looking into that direction. I like living in a city a lot. I really do. So that's been a problem, because a lot of the decentralization goals that I hear are clearly achieved by living in the woods. But I don't want to live in the woods for a bunch of reasons. So I'm hoping to find something with close proximity to a city, if not in a city, that hasn't found itself the center of the deranging effects of the internet.
You have mentioned reading and the fact that you have read quite a lot of books. And there is a comment here that I wanted to read, but I didn't get the chance to. And that's by Divide by Zero, who told me ask him to give an update on his books, on the books that he's reading. Skinny Chris isn't as funny as Chubby Chris, but definitely more wise.
Darn. Yeah, it's probably. I don't like talking about my reading list. It gets me in so much fucking trouble. I can't tell you how many times. I read controversial books, and even topical stuff, things that people. recognize in part or know like something about, and then you get, the problem is you get labeled. But like I read extreme books as a matter of rule. I guess an introduction to my reading list as a child, I read tons and tons of math and computer books. That was my deal. And I had bookshelves of these books. I gave all those books away for a few reasons. Mostly I think it's stupid to hold your books. I have mixed feelings about it. I think it's kind of dumb to hold your books on display so that you can tell people, I guess, what you've read. Because like the reason to read the book, in my estimation, is to have knowledge other people don't have. And that is your power. That's what you get from reading. So if you tell people the power you have, you may render yourself neutered by anybody who has a nominal comprehension of what it is that the book contains. Now, that, in the case of the computer science, I just didn't like social signaling my computer knowledge at the time. It's I was like, why am I doing this? It doesn't help me at all. So I got rid of it. Since then, I've just tried to become a more well-rounded person. I've read a lot of fiction as well over the years, just because you get books, you read them. All the popular stuff. But these days I'm reading mostly like sociology and philosophy books. I read a lot of political books on both sides, both on the fascist extreme and the communist extreme, with very little in between, oddly. I guess I want to sit down and read more history books that would be probably considered like centrist, and I just don't seem to, because there's some crazy idea or another I want to understand. So I'll leave it at that. But if there's like some boogeyman book, be it like a Foucault book, or I don't know. I guess Ivan Ilyin, is he a boogeyman at the moment? The Russian like fascist guy. He's great. I love him. I read these things. So yeah, I mean, I've got a backlog of books right here. I actually just loaded that into my car. I got to figure out what I'm going to take traveling with me. I suppose I could have read some of that for you. But that's most of what I read, I guess.
It's actually interesting that you are not part of the school of thought which considers that fascism and communism are actually on the same side, because both of them require a great amount of state centralization and control over the means of production and propaganda and every aspect of social life.
Well, these extreme politics often feed on each other. So it's very hard to imagine a fascist world without a communist presence, or vice versa. There was an equilibrium that brought us to those. History. What is the saying? History sits on top of a rotating. History is a rotating door. I think that's the saying. Like you have these extremes now where the center is no longer sustainable. So the door can swing left or right. Like you could have had a communist Germany, or you could have had a fascist Germany. You could have had a fascist USSR or a communist USSR. The center failed, and then the extremes came in. And the extreme politics are usually about attaining power more so than they are about running a country. So you look at like the communist books. I've yet to hear what the communist plan is. Granted, I haven't actually read the Communist Manifesto, so maybe the plan is in there, although I don't think it is. Like the communist books are filled with all the reasons why the incumbency can't work, which I find very funny. There are great reasons why the incumbency can't work. All the time, like you read, like, oh yeah, that's right, this can't possibly work, and then you go outside and you see it working, and you're like, well, that's kind of weird. And then on the same side, you have the same kind of thing with the fascist books, where it's a kind of like how to take the reins of control from some centrist society, and bend it towards your end, at whatever end that might be, oftentimes as dictated. And so like then there's a dearth of prescriptive instruction. It's usually about stealing the reins. And it's funny to me when people like advocate communism, because in many cases all they're advocating is anything but this, which we see a lot of. Like so much of the political discourse is an advocacy for anything but this, whereas like what it is that's being advocated is largely undefined. It's just not what we currently have, and then it's hard to suffer that foolery sometimes too. I have to confess, because you have somebody who knows all the reasons, great reasons why what we have can't work. Like I see this all the time. That people know that what we are doing can't work, and that's it. That's it. There's no more. That's the end. And then you're stuck. Well, like what else would we do? No, and it's just crickets. So people then start to navel gaze and all of this, but We don't really have a good prescriptive formula in society for much of anything. We have like the trolley problem at the apex of this comprehension, where I don't think we've budged very much since its invention. You know, the idea that you can go left or right, the end, is oftentimes what you're stuck with. And then, you know, you have these solutions like democracy, where you take the sentiment and the feels. But I think we're all figuring out that, number one, like, spite perverts that, because people will, like GameStop, perfect example. People will vote against everybody's possible interests because it is a kind of anything but this coalition. So that's like a great example of like why democracy is probably doomed in a lot of senses. You lost the shared bonds and the trust, so now you have these perverting forces of spite, which are like games of chicken, basically. Whoever can convince enough people to like stare down the regulator or stare down the incumbency, that becomes the guiding spirit. There may be no greater comprehension of attainment thereafter, and it could be successful even in spite of that. I mean, that's one perversion of the process. Another perversion of the process is we can't even know what we want. We can't know what the hell we want. I can give you a million reasons, technically, why a person would or wouldn't want some feature in Bitcoin, but like that's not available to them. They're just going to go with who they trust, and who they trust is often like really perverse. It might be like Saifedean, because Saifedean told them what they wanted to hear, and that's going to be the reason why we should, you know, activate Taproot, you know, somehow. Like, because like 4 years ago, he told them that Bitcoin had 79 protons in its nucleus, and so like, you know, that's the forces we have in society at the moment. It's an argument. I think it's an argument against centralization. I think that the simple truth is we got too big to contain a lot of the societal forces that were in place before the internet. And the internet is this total disclosure machine that will demoralize all of the religions. It'll demoralize all of the ideologies, and eventually it'll demoralize the language, which we're seeing. Like what is racism is an unanswerable question now, all of a sudden, when they used to have a very clear answer up until, you know, some year, and now that moral is gone. And I don't think people realize that's what's happening, and I don't think that that's even explainable to most people, but that's how it seems to me. It's a solvable problem, I think, even, but only if you're willing to walk away from the machine and go do and find what it is you wanted the machine to do. That's where I'm at with that.
You know, I think to some extent you're being way too gloomy about how the internet is going to destroy all meaning and everything about religion and society. I think that these mechanisms, sorry, it's 1 a.m. here, so I'm doing my best to stay in character with my English-speaking personality, but I think that they have means to adapt all the time. And I'm pretty sure that there were lots of moments in history when religion was doomed, basically, and had no reason to exist other than the fact that people have like a need to trust in a higher authority that's immaterial. They cannot feel, they cannot get disappointed or humiliated by it. And yet it found so many ways to adapt and just give the people what they wanted, as an institution, as a system of beliefs, as everything else. And I'm not even an atheist. Like, I very much believe that there must be a God, but us as humans, if we were created by some sort of superior entity, then we do not possess the means or capacity to understand what that is. So I'm pretty sure that religion is just an abstractization of what some people thought must be the creator of this world. Most likely we don't even possess the means to perceive. We're just like ants or something in a world that we barely even understand, but like to conceptualize and theorize. And I very much believe that science has so many limits that, you know, we like to disregard. Like, we turn the blind eye on the fact that there are limits to our understanding of the world, and we take what we know today as science as our only explanation for everything that's happening out there. So I'm pretty sure that actually science has become a religion in recent years. Like,
Certainly.
today you find someone who says, I believe in science, but what they actually say is that they believe in a small number of people who bring them back the confidence that they have in the world, and they project the worldviews that they already have. And even this science has become very much entwined with the political field. So you have science which confirms political biases on all sides. If you want to believe in something, you're going to find some scientific justification for it, because there was somebody who funded a rigged type of research which ended up confirming that type of science.
You'll find that you'll find that the people, the scientists, the followers of the science, they often believe in just science, the sign, not the signification. There's often even a complete dearth of comprehension over what the scientific method is, and you can tell that because they generally believe in science with an ignorance of the trolley problem. There's no science that can be applied to the trolley problem, and yet they'll affirm that science offers solutions to many problems that are trolley problems. It's because they believe in the science. Like, the word science is the Schelling point by which they'll find community, and in that sense, God. But it of itself is effectively meaningless because it is decoupled from the terrain in which there's a scientific method, there's a hypothesis, there's peer review, and falsification, et cetera, et cetera. This is also how like logic became like an Apollonian tribe, which is also similar. You'll find that people pursue logic having zero comprehension of what logic is. Like, I've spent a lot of time in computer science. I know logic better than most people. Probably not as good as every programmer, but better than most people. And you'll hear people tell you what is logical without any precept of logic in any applied sense. It is a faith in my estimation, the logic god, which I think is Apollo, if I'm not mistaken. So like, these are like Apollonians of a sort, and not scientists or even practitioners of science. These are followers of that god, believing that there's some terrain in the matter that can take them out of where they're at. And there's truth to that, but that renders their opinion almost useless, because like all of their opinions would be post hoc constructions from logic as a objective truth-finding mission, which it isn't. It works in some context, sure, for finding truth, but it will never solve the trolley problem. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if we can get to any conclusion in this regard because it's pretty messed up. But there's something that I wanted to discuss like very badly, and
Sure.
I really wanted to know your opinion on this. Like, when you first... No, let me begin with this. Why did you get into Bitcoin? And what was like the philosophical understanding that you had on it at the time? Was it decentralization, which is also the reason why you got disillusioned, or was it something else?
Well, first and foremost, it was obvious to me that this was going to become the success that it is obvious now. We don't have to get into that. It was just, I could see this. It was present to me that this would grow. It was as obvious to me as any internet movement could have been. So I was very happy to invest myself in it. I liked the people. I liked the skepticism. And, there's a lot of fucked up stuff happening with these hierarchical centers of control. And in many cases, like institutions that carried over from not only the financial crisis of 2008, but also, I think, in opposition to the exuberance of the dot-com era of the late 90s or so. So I remember there being a spirit of technological superiority in the 90s that fell a little flat, not completely flat, just a little flat, but that could then get revitalized here in Bitcoin to this great end that I think we're actually heading towards. I will say, I don't know if we're going to head there in the way that any of us thought. But that was the biggest stuff. It was just, a lot of it was just obvious that this was going to grow. To me, I was like, oh, this is going to grow. And then I liked the people, and it just kind of all fell together at that time. Also, social media was kind of new, and so that in and of itself was a big part of the journey. You know, with regard to doom and gloom on the internet, it's not that the internet's going to fail, or like the world will end. I think of it more like the printing press. Like a lot of what's the backdrop to what's going on is very similar to the pressures that the printing press brought onto society. And I think if we were around in the printing press and I told you all of the great virtues of the next thing, it could have been interpreted as doom and gloom for like the Catholic Church. And then I'd have to explain to like the Christian that no, these are great things, but I would fail in that explanation. And in truth, like it caused a lot of damage as well. And so I think we have a lot of that in our future. So it's not exactly doom and gloom, but it is major change in society, I think.
Right, but I want to ask you if you were involved or interested in projects like, what was it called, eGold and Liberty Dollar and all the precursors that more or less were philosophically in line with what Bitcoin is.
I wasn't involved in those projects, but the libertarian movement was one that I had a proclivity towards even as far back as in the 90s. And I since found that insufficient. But at the time, at least, that seemed like the very obvious move for society. And so I was no stranger to these tenets at all. I was very familiar with the liturgy and the demographic appeals because it was something that I felt myself to be a part of.
Yeah, so were you also interested in stuff that precedes Bitcoin while you're researching computer science? I know that you're not that old, so it's unlikely that in the 90s you're into eCash or something, but...
Well, that didn't really exist. Like that, it clearly existed because we went back and cherry-picked those stories and used them as supporting steps in the path to Bitcoin. But at the time, nobody knew these stories, or very few people knew these stories. And I was not active in Liberty Dollar, Liberty Reserve, eGold. I vaguely remembered, I think it was eGold was it eGold in the 90s? And then they were based in Boca Raton, if I'm not mistaken. And Charles Evans worked there. And I remember when they got like raided in the newspaper. But you got to consider that at the time, Bitcoin was just not remotely possible in anyone's comprehension. There really was a major innovation with blockchain as deployed by Bitcoin. And so for me, it was at best a cyberpunk fantasy, at best, that we would have any kind of decentralization in the form of currency. So that was part of the wow factor too. Like that was a major breakthrough in something, be it economics or computer science. So that was a major, a humbling news piece. Like that, you heard it and you were humbled before it, because in many senses it was comprehensible, but only after the fact. Like the word came and you were made to understand the thing that should have always been clear, that is this blockchain. So that force, I also think I rolled into my comprehension of how society would probably understand things going forward. I've often found myself ahead of the herd, not always, but often. And sometimes you have like this sort of clarity, like, oh, this has to be the way it goes. And I had that kind of a moment with Bitcoin. I think a lot of us have. I think you hear the stories of people when they discover Bitcoin, and it's like, oh yeah, everyone's going to figure this out. This makes sense.
You know, I read about it when I was 21 or something. And it just did not make sense to me. Like, I was thinking, I knew nothing about economics. I knew nothing about the history of money. So I judge myself sometimes, and I think that I could have spent more time looking into it, but I did not. I was too young. I did not have the proper life experiences to understand why this is valuable and why it has any potential. And at the same time, I did not have much money because I was a student. So even if I bought one Bitcoin, that to me was like a lunch or something. And if I had to choose between eating lunch on that day and getting some strange internet money, then I suppose I would have chosen the lunch.
Yeah, well, I struggled a bit with it at first. I thought it was cute. I didn't know who would need it until Silk Road came. And then I was like, oh, I know who needs it. This is a slam dunk. And then at that point, I was 100% in.
Yeah, makes sense. I also went through the phase where I knew about it. I knew that it's used on the Silk Road, but I was 23 or something, and I was trying to prove myself as a nice person and a good citizen and stuff like that. And to me, it seemed immoral. So just because there were immoral acts, and in my mind, illegal and immoral were kind of the same thing. I just want to clarify.
Isn't it that funny? That's the demoralization at work, I would suggest. The law was demoralized in you. That is a ramification of this thing that you have discovered in Bitcoin. And I think the law is in a real rough spot right now. So I don't think you made the wrong decision. I mean, we're seeing a lot of. I don't know how much longer the law is going to withstand these pressures. So that you were just ahead of the curve there.
Yeah, but what I mean is that you need to actually think for yourself at some point and figure out that there's something wrong. And I was pretty much a normie up to, I guess, 25 or something. I never really questioned most of the stuff happening around me. I just needed the right kind of deception with the world to start thinking for myself and realize that most of it is just the sugar-coated lie. And the stuff that I've learned in school and university and along the years is just designed to help me become basically a perfect slave.
You have just articulated, in my estimation, the case for demoralization as a comprehension of what happened to you. You were demoralized, you were deprogrammed effectively from the incumbent society. I don't know if we still care about that, but that's what I'm hearing in you as you speak, and that's not a bad thing. I don't think. I think it's a very good thing. But I think this harkens to what we saw even with the printing press, which also functioned in this way. You have to remember that at that time, anyone who spoke Latin was presumed to know a lot about how the world works, and that because you didn't speak Latin, you couldn't possibly understand how the world works. But then when the printing press came along, it turned out that, lo and behold, all of the people who are speaking Latin, they're just acting. They don't actually understand much of anything past what it is that the non-Latin speakers speak. And I think here you've made that case in a similar way in my understanding of what you've said and what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I suppose it goes back to ethics and principles. Because you can, when you realize what's going on, you can either go on with it and say, this is fine, I can act, or you're going to look for a way out.
Yes.
It's insane that I ended up discovering this pirate money, because I like to call it pirate money sometimes. It's handled in places where possibly there is no proper jurisdiction for the big empires of the world, and it's traded on alternative markets, which are parallel to the mainstream governmental stuff, which is certified and accepted and blah blah. And right now it's finding its way into the mainstream, and it's getting a lot of unexpected embracement from mainstream financial world. But I guess this is only tied with the crazy fiat system, which only creates more inflation. And
well, but note that it could be said, this is just a theory, I know that, it could be said that even the financial institutions are demoralizing themselves and we can see this probably in the case for Uber and these types of companies wherein the efficiency that they offer is to circumvent legacy regulations. And we kind of take that for granted, it's an obvious and of course kind of thing. But I think there's a symbology there that is non-trivial, that is emblematic of a lot of societal trends at the moment that I think are accelerating.
yeah, so Would you still identify Bitcoin as libertarian?
No.
Go on.
I mean, it's a tough question to answer. It just when I look at the demographic of people in it today, they're mostly like Wall Street bets guys. Now that might be where my vantage point is here in Florida, but if Wall Street bets is libertarian, then I guess it is. But I don't think Wall Street is libertarian. I think Wall Street is number go up. Like I said, mainstreamification would render all ideologies negligible in the communication of the product, because the process of mainstreamification exists to effectively render the meaning, to convert the meaning into money. Like that's, think of like South Park. Actually, South Park's pretty good, but like comedy in general. If you think of South Park when it first started, it was like, maybe you don't remember, maybe you do, but it was like this sort of incidental show. Like I remember they had these very aggressive ads on a then relatively new network called Comedy Central. And it wasn't the kind of thing that you would go to a store and see. It was more akin to like a Beavis and Butthead, where you figured it would be like fringe, but there would be some like authenticity to the show. And you got all of that. But over time, and what should happen from here is that the characters on the show are rendered more impotent over time, less aggressive and less niche and more commercially friendly, until eventually, like left unabated, you would have the main characters, selling I don't know, like children's toys that are happy stuffed on Christmas. Like you'll lose the meaning as a result of the mainstreamification. To the credit of the South Park creators, I don't actually see that it has gone in that direction, but at some point they'll probably turn the show over to the community, which means they'll give it to some like financial company, they'll sell it to like MGM or something, and then MGM will just take that symbol, that sign, and start to extract value out of it by reducing the meaning. I think we've seen that in like other shows, very like Star Wars maybe.
I think that's the best example.
Yeah, right. Okay, so then let Star Wars be that example, where you had like a fairly contiguous presentation that just ended up getting blown over by any excuse to sell merch. And that's why I don't think Bitcoin is libertarian currently. I see how mainstreamification is working. When you got to consider too, like if your job is to sell Bitcoin, you're just going to tell people whatever the hell they need to hear, because like your performance as is measured in every way that matters is based on how many units you move. So whatever the client's got to hear, you're not going to risk the deal by telling them about your libertarian values over time. You're just going to whatever, it's decentralized and green, or whatever they need to hear. I made the sale, and then we go to the next guy. And that kind of effect happens often. We're kind of some of this stuff I think was at a level of like stasis with the television, and then the TV, and then the internet just kind of like put into hyperdrive mode. I don't know, but like with television, like there's some of these forces as well, and the television approach was to take these signs, reify them, and then phase them out as they convert it into money. You see all these like franchises that come and go, and some of that is a reflection of just the fickleness of the attention span of the consumer who wants new things. But some of it too is the limited life shelf that any of these symbols can have. I would suppose Mickey Mouse might be an exception to that, but Mickey Mouse has like that's a float. I'm pretty sure Mickey Mouse is a floating signifier that points to nothing but Mickey Mouse. If you look at the old Steamboat Willie cartoons, like Mickey Mouse was a character. Now I think there have been 100 different shows of Mickey Mouse where Mickey Mouse was always a different character that simply appeared as a mouse that we all know. Until now, when you think of Mickey Mouse, you just kind of think of this mega corporation that has to do with kids.
I'm happy they haven't done the same with Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
That one is still pure. But anyway, I don't want to get into Bugs Bunny and stuff. I just want to ask you something in regards to the current mainstream state of Bitcoin. You haven't been on Twitter lately, and I hope you haven't been on Twitter lately because there's a lot of awful stuff going on. And you see phenomena such as Michael Saylor announcing that he bought Bitcoin in, I think it was August 2020. And ever since, he has become like the folk hero and the guy who headlines the Bitcoin conference in Miami, which is going to happen this week.
Yeah.
And he gets listed above Nick Szabo, who objectively, even if you disagree that he is important in the Bitcoin space because he's not a developer, he doesn't do much, that guy was instrumental for what Bitcoin became eventually, because he created one of the precursor inventions and money systems. And he was also instrumental in explaining how Bitcoin works to the early adopters. Like, he was way ahead of the curve and he was very useful, but that guy is less relevant somehow than the new guy who pumps everyone's bags.
Exactly.
And then you get
exactly
Elon Musk, who is supposedly the richest person in the world in terms of whatever stonk evaluation he has. And then he tweets about Dogecoin and tweets about Bitcoin and pumps the price, starts accepting Bitcoin, pumps the price, and then he's like, we're going to stop accepting Bitcoin. And it goes down 20% just because of one tweet. And it makes you wonder, this is insane.
It is insane. And I'm glad you see some of that. I mean, this going back to my example of like 100 people, the Saylor example is what happens when you take 100 people, you press them for a consensus. You know, Szabo was one of the 10 people. He didn't tell people what they wanted to hear. He told people what he saw. But because you have 90 people, in addition to those 10 now, they're going to elect a very denominational representative who's going to tell them very rudimentary things, and who he himself is probably a kind of sign. Like Michael, I actually don't know Saylor's background, but he has an affinity. Has a positively balanced affinity to anybody who I think watches the financial stuff. So like his confidence is greater than Nick Szabo's confidence, which is perverse because Nick Szabo has made a lot more money than Saylor has, but like the public doesn't have access to these lessons, and nor would they want to. Like if you try to explain this stuff to people, they're going to block you because the customer is always right. Like you have this perverse force in the economy that you're always up against, at least on the social media networks.
I actually recall a tweet by Nick Szabo who said, "You cannot have a proper con without confidence."
Yeah, that's what the con stands for. These are confidence games. One of the problems I've also had with the platform that was very depressing even for me is that there is social commentary that I find apt as applied to Bitcoin and society. Yet, because I'm a Bitcoiner, it's construed as detrimental to Bitcoin, when it has absolutely nothing to do with Bitcoin even. So if we have these financial products that are rendered confidence games, you're going to see these gigantic valuations in Bitcoin that don't really make a lot of sense. Now, you can hear that and say like, oh, well, Chris is like a bad actor because he's not telling me what I want to hear, number one, but then number two, he's like not being true to his cause. But the rest of the story is that that's true for all assets in the economy, and that these effects are probably applying throughout society. So who knows, maybe Bitcoin's even exempt from these forces, but like we can see it here in all likelihood, and we can talk about it here, and in a more functional model of discourse, you would be able to identify the vagrancies in society and then mediate that. But since the impetus is to sell, like you don't really have any sort of room for uncertainty, I guess. Like the internet's a very confident place. It is, the effects of advertising on the internet are such that it became a place where everybody's right, and now we're seeing that arrogance trickle into society outside the internet in many ways, and a lot of people are going to have to grapple with that one way or another. I don't know how. The trajectory is on; it's unsustainable, which tells me it'll end at some point. Whether or not that ends in the way that it has in prior bubbles or something new, I don't know.
This whole situation is unprecedented. Like, when you think about it, okay, we have cycles of price discovery, and you're going to have bull markets and bear markets. You have to think, where does it go from here? Like, you have the richest man in the world, supposedly, who is a shill and then is no longer a shill, and manipulates the price with tweets. And you think about it and then say, okay, we are heading towards a bear market. We are ditching Elon. He's an idiot. He has no idea what he's talking about. We don't want to get associated with him. Let's just cast him out. But the next cycle, who's going to come in, It seems like there's always something bigger that's happening with every cycle. And it just, you take Bitcoin and you put it on a bigger, grander stage, not scene. There's scène in French, and whatever. I'm tired.
No, I agree. Bitcoin can devour the world. Like this, the Albanian Civil War is an example I used to go to often. Like we have enough regulatory capture in the United States now to where it may very well be impossible at the regulatory level to contain Bitcoin. But at some point, the military will just step in, because I don't know what society expects to happen in a world where the money fails, but I'm pretty sure it's going to involve the military. And it's at some point there's a guy with a gun who's going to show up somewhere and tell people we're done with the old games. That's a lot of ways. Democracy is probably that story, that you have like a army that comes in, it creates peace in a vacuum, and once successful wants to hand it off to the community to run. And so then like a democracy appears, I guess, and that things are good until some sort of system failure happens, and then the cycle repeats itself. But when the system fails, it becomes evident that all of the rhetoric was just discourse analysis and like literary criticism. Like that was it. Like the entire, like we have these great. We have these like great stories in America, and in every country has their own great stories, and they're holy to us because we are Americans. But there comes a time when like perhaps that isn't the case anymore. Let's say the country splits like we did during the Civil War, and now we replace those old stories with new stories that are in many ways identical to the old ones, just with different characters now that are like under a new sign. And what we find is that there's a lot of post hoc rationalization all around, that really it was the military that came in that created the power, and from there it was just a matter of trust in the military that kept things going, maybe, until that, like, think of all the rhetoric you heard as a kid. You're not an American, so maybe you didn't hear the same, but like, I heard all kinds of rhetoric as a kid. It was rhetoric. It was discourse. It existed to reify exceptionalism and to inspire us to lead behind this sign, and the sign America and the flag. And now I look around and I ask myself, who believes any of this stuff? And unfortunately, the answer is very few people. So it's evident to me, at least, that much of what I heard was aspirational rhetoric by a well-intentioned political party, but it was probably mostly performative the whole time. Like, we see these things, like with GameStop is a great example. I don't know what the story with GameStop is, but like a nebulous force decided to come in and put an end to it. And then like, there's no consensus, there was no democracy, there's no explanation really, it was just a sentiment. And probably for the better, but we're clearly creating rhetoric that is distanced from that outcome that was manifested. And so now you have to do like a personal reckoning. Like, do you believe anything, or do you just act out the prevailing opinion to get you through the day? And you probably do that, unfortunately, I guess.
Yeah, so you have mentioned two concepts which are very interesting. The first, which actually opened your statement, concerned the fact that Bitcoin might just end up eating the world. And then halfway into your argument, you mentioned the military and the fact that the man with the gun can step in and make claims which either defend the status quo or advocate for some sort of new type of society. But my argument is that this doesn't really scale. So there's only a number of people that the military can threaten at one time without having consequences on a different part of the country or of the world. So if that happens, there are going to be responses that are not necessarily friendly. and will affect the well-being of the military person. Even if they have monopoly over the possession of guns, they can still suffer consequences beyond their work field, So there's always some sort of leverage, and you can argue right now, you can say that taxation doesn't scale either, because the taxman cannot verify each person's records, so you can just lie to the taxman. But there are still mechanisms in place that have been perpetuated, which on one hand make you act in good faith and punish you if you don't. So I suppose that the man with the gun threatening you to accept a new system of beliefs can also function in the same way by establishing true propaganda, obviously, because otherwise, unless... This is another Derose Law that you mentioned during the last podcast that we did. Bless you again. You said that there are people who program silicon and people who program carbon.
Yes.
And I did not forget this. And I think this is one of the nicest metaphors
It's true.
that you can...
maybe some people disagree, but I see it. It's, you gotta... We have all this rhetoric to create ignorance, because in the ignorance magic forms. And then you say something like carbon's programmed, and it's demoralizing. It removes the magic, the magic of emergent consensus, perhaps, that exists in the conventional society. And so people don't like it, and I get it. But some of this stuff is just like you got to decide if you're going to deal with reality in a predictive way or not, or you're going to invest in a delusional story that makes you happy. And that's, not to get too coarse, but that's always been a kind of religious question, where do you drop the magic and embrace the cold hard facts? And I don't know. It's for me. Here's the thing with all of this is that you have people who aren't investors in the space now, and they're going to want to hear magic, and they're not going to want to hear cold hard facts. But in the old days, we would talk a lot more about some of the cold hard facts that I thought were obvious, and we weren't shouted down for it. And when the process was working right, I shouldn't say right, when the process was working well, those concerns were merely concerns and not outrages. But now it's the concerns are outrageous, so it makes it hard to communicate things that are even well intentioned in matters of community development. And that's the thing. You have to decide.
There's a double standard there, because if Peter Todd says something like Bitcoin is going to zero, or we need some more inflation to subsidize mining, or else it's not going to be profitable in the next 30 years. Then he's not going to get the same backlash as if Saifedean or Pomp or these hype men types said something similar.
Correct.
Because on one hand, you have the people who actually understand how Bitcoin works and have been thinking about it for a longer time. And on the other hand, you have the salesmen who are trying to sell you an idea of something.
Yeah, so I'm glad you see that, because I've thought about this a lot. And some of this harkens into the American politics exactly, particularly with regard to the universities. There are these competing forces of truth and justice in society that, when working together, produce amazing things. Everything amazing that's ever happened has typically been when those forces are in check. However, for reasons that are not worth getting into if they're even comprehensible, we are out of sync there. And what you are finding is that truth stands in opposition to justice in today's society, which is not good. In a functioning society, it would be a yin and a yang thing. So you would have a place and a trust between the pitchman, the salesman, and the technologist. The Peter Todd delivering the terrible truth, and the Saifedean delivering the wonderful justice. And I think the internet is kind of a part of this, but all of these spaces now become rendered oppositional as opposed to synchronous. You see this in, some of this is Derridian, but you see this even in the juxtaposition of man and woman, which would theoretically work in sync, but in contemporary times are in opposition. You see this in almost any kind of like bimodal distribution of outcome. They end up being rendered oppositional. Part of that is because I think the medium exists to press for objectivity, where there can't be, and so then you end up with people having to choose between, do you want to choose men or women? It's such an asinine question. There's a coexistence. That's theoretically what we've always done. And if you press me to choose, I don't even know what to say. But I'm a man, so then I guess my hands are tied. I have to choose man because that's the deal. Black versus white. All of these sorts of like taxonomies seem to become oppositional. A lot of that is, I think, how we're making money right now. We're taking a lot of this. I think happened in like Rome in some ways, where old institutional like objective societal facilities ended up becoming rendered like profit centers, where you can imagine like someone pays to be innocent or something. It's just we're kind of eating our seed corn, I think, when we are forcing people to choose one versus the other when they should be choosing some proportion of both. And people make money all the way down to zero if that's a force that we're seeing. I don't know. That's very concerning, I will say. And that started before the internet, but the internet really ratcheted it up. So yeah, I mean, good luck explaining that to a Bitcoiner who's somebody who showed up here wide-eyed, poorly informed, and with outrageous expectations. They're just not going to get it, and they're going to choose with all the righteousness in the world in a stand of justice over truth, or vice versa. Rarely vice versa, I think, but that's the world you're in. Some of this is like cultural degeneration, where we put the interests of the weak above the interests of the strong. Peter Tan's like a mentally strong guy. He's one of the mentally strongest men I've met, in particular, in Bitcoin. And we're going to prioritize the mental retards over Peter Todd, because Peter Todd's going to tell us how the terrain looks, and the mental retards are going to fight to change the map to fit, what their hope is.
I don't know. There are always layers, and it's not like the opinion of somebody who only writes opinions and gets popular writing opinions is going to influence the base layer protocol of Bitcoin. Unless there is enough pressure and these people actually run nodes, which is very unlikely, there is almost zero chance that they're going to make any kind of change. And I think that the beauty of this whole system is that it's kind of more objective than the human opinions that we express most of the times. It doesn't really care what we think about it or how we use it. It just works.
Yeah,
and the most we can do is just modify some parameters to it. But other than that, it's just a pretty objective system. Was that a knock on your door?
Yeah, give me 1 second here. I apologize. I agree that it's
fine. We have been
system.
Speaking for almost 4 hours.
That's
or something.
Okay. Hold on. Right back.
Golden Bitcoin, 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 golden Bitcoin.
If you're interested in honest money, you gotta check out Vaultoro, the place where you can trade with Bitcoin, with gold, and with silver. I know that this is a very long episode, and if you made it this far, then I believe that you're a big fan of Chris Derose, and you're a hero if you made it so far. So I will not bug you too much with the ad, but go to bitcoin-takeover.com/Vaultoro, and you're going to find a QR code, and unless someone figured out a way to milk that faucet, you can still get 1,000 sats or 10 bits for yourself to reward yourself for being such a hero and listening up to this point. So thank you very much, Vaultoro, for sponsoring. And also thank you very much, Evan Rose and Vake, for making this possible without a second sponsor. So without further ado, let's get back to Chris Derose.
Okay, I'm back.
I really hope that you did not pass on the opportunity to get late just to talk to me.
No, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that.
Okay. So, objectivity.
No, I mean, Bitcoin does offer objectivity in like the space. I mean, the objectivity works in a context. So, like the context of payment is fairly objective. Though I will say that's unfortunately that's a case where it's become less so. I think because of the regulatory constraints, it's getting harder to buy drugs with Bitcoin than it ever has been. So the objectivity is arguably not the case there. Another thing too in Bitcoin is like you have faith. People come to Bitcoin because they have faith in technology generally. You know, we see this even like with Ethereum. Let's use Ethereum because that's a really, really easy example. They have faith in technology so much so that they think the technology can displace like arbitration in courts. That was an early thing that I started to see, and I didn't have the lexicon to like really understand it in those terms. But I look back now, and you go to somebody, and you say like, okay, well, there's this thing called the oracle that's a human. So like all the technical things you do is never going to remove the oracle because somebody has to be a testifier of the thing, and all of us. And as soon as that becomes an input into the system, you've immediately reverted to almost all of the same concerns you had with the incumbent system. And because their faith was strong, they would proceed to really just sulk and then find ways to remove you from the room and then create a memory hole where you never existed and then carry on their merry way where the faith continues to march. And that also exists in Bitcoin. It exists in all these blockchains. Like, you know, there's none of them, Monero, et cetera, that doesn't have this. And it's definitely needed to a significant degree. But I think that in terms of objectivity, it is, yes, the case that Bitcoin offers a lot of that, but I don't think it's perfect, and I don't think it's immune. I think that I've said this before, this will enter the memory hole, but I think it's only a matter of time before the U.S. government does one or both of the following, which is to regulate the ticker symbols, and then the second thing they're going to either do, assuming they don't just make this whole thing illegal, would be to find some mechanism by which U.S. exchanges are performing complete and total KYC, which removes the objectivity at that point. Like it is once again subject to all of the laws that the U.S. dollar was, and then some, probably more. So like that's a place where I don't think we've decentralized, or at least we haven't thought ahead.
Well, but that's just the objectivity of the currency. But then you have the network, which, unlike a government, for example, cannot delete traces that something had happened. So it's like an oracle of history or something. The Bitcoin network by itself, if you have sent a transaction and it's on a public ledger, it's proof that something had happened, as opposed to something which is governmental that can be manipulated and erased from memory and history.
We have done it. Like Luke Dash Jr. has single-handedly done it. Erased blocks, erased consensus when it was deemed antithetical to the network interest. So we have seen that happen. It's important that you recognize that context applies, and it does, and I don't want to lose sight of that. But it isn't. Again, I would assert that you're starting from a Bitcoin first principle, rather than what is an objective store of value as a first principle. So, like, how about this? Outside of Bitcoin, what is an objective medium of exchange? What is an objective medium of exchange, I suppose, outside of Bitcoin?
Gold, I guess.
Yeah, fair. Even paper money, I would suggest, is in the spectrum relevant. Maybe we're dicing words here, but compared to gold, how does Bitcoin look? How about that?
Well, it depends on what you look at. In terms of history, it looks terrible, but in terms of use cases and potential, I think it looks pretty good.
Well, no,
because
in terms
with gold,
of
you
objectivity, as we were previously understanding it in matters of payment.
I think gold is terrible there is nothing that you can do with it. I think you're better off.
Regardless of the
paying-
morality of gold, like be it terrible or not, like is it an objective? Is it a case of objectivity and payment and medium of payment? Yeah.
Right, so let me get back. How did we define objectivity?
We
It's
really-
almost 2
we
a.m.
really
here,
didn't.
sorry.
It's okay. We really didn't. I mean, when I heard it, I felt that it was without much contention or ability to reverse. The payment was settled with objectivity was how I was interpreting it.
Oh, okay, so immutability, I suppose,
Well,
is the
or
word
without
that we're looking
prejudice. Like
for.
I don't know. Like this was open ended, so maybe we hit like a wall here. I think prejudice was the matter of issue when we're debating the objectivity of the payment mechanism. So like, who can exert prejudice was how I understood it. And then then I asked for an example, and then you came up with gold, which I think is fair. I would also have said cash probably exists, and then we can ask, how is prejudice applied? If you're with me on the prejudice, how does prejudice applied in gold transactions? How is prejudice applied in cash transactions? And how is prejudice applied in Bitcoin transactions? But I introduced prejudice in here, and maybe that's unfair.
And what you're referring to is the fact that when you use custodians for your payments and you're not making actual peer-to-peer trades, you can be subjected to a lot of censorship. And objectively, you can argue that it's more likely for your Bitcoin transaction on Coinbase to get censored as opposed to a cash transaction, which is something to which I agree.
Yeah, and I would think that you would have on the one end of this transaction like a product, and on the other end of the transaction, a monetary recipient. So the darknet's going to be the best indicator, I would suggest, which would point to the U.S. dollar being perhaps the best payment mechanism that offers the least amount of discrimination on any given purchase, as evidenced by what we're seeing in the market. For people who have this need, which is a bit of a bummer. But Bitcoin does do that for sure, and always has, and will continue for at least the foreseeable future, I think. A lot of the stuff we'll discuss, I think, in Bitcoin requires some notion of medium of exchange in order to make sense, which is probably not what Bitcoin does as its leading ethos. As
Have you
evidenced by
tried the
fork.
Lightning Network?
I have in the early days, but I don't see it being used as commonly out in the field. I understand that. I understand that the menu offers this for purchase. I just don't know that people are buying it. Maybe they are.
I'm gonna buy you a Lightning node for Christmas.
Okay. Like I think Lightning is great. I don't want to say it's not. It is.
I just want to let you know that it has grown so much. I'm blown away most of the time.
Well, what
Just
percentage
by-
of non-speculative transactions are being done on Lightning? Do we have that idea?
Can you repeat?
What percentage of non-speculative transactions are being performed in Lightning?
I honestly have no idea.
I don't think anybody
I can
does.
only look
Yeah.
at volume, but in terms
That's all
of
speculative.
what gets bought and to whom, that's kind of private. It's part of transaction privacy on the Lightning Network.
And it's also probably mostly speculative, but we can't really know. Not that speculative isn't of value, it's just that it, referencing what I said earlier about the means of Bitcoin as a payment mechanism, occluding a lot of comprehensions of Bitcoin's value. We decided not to make it a payment mechanism exactly, and that's okay, and that was clearly even appropriate if you're using the price as a metric of success, but it makes a lot of decisions complicated. Like you end up with the same kind of perverse incentives we see with Tesla, where what you're selling is like shares of the company and not cars. In the case of Bitcoin, we're not selling a payment mechanism, we're selling confidence in Bitcoin.
I don't necessarily agree. You can still do transactions on the base layer. Today, the mempool was actually empty.
You might miss the point, and I may just be wrong, to be clear, but you can still buy a Tesla. It's not to say that Tesla only offers shares in Tesla. Tesla does offer Teslas, but because of the exuberance in the market and the inflation in asset prices, the interests of the investors exceed the interests of the
I get what you
consumers.
mean. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I thought you were taking it to the scaling debate, but you're actually taking it to the number go up and hodling territory, where people don't really want to spend it or use it as a currency, and they would rather hold it speculatively just because they know that in the future, in a few years, it's going to be worth a lot more.
Right, exactly.
And that's going to get interesting once the block rewards diminish, because most of the coins which get traded regularly are the ones that are newly minted. So once you're going to have less than 1 BTC per block reward, which is going to happen in 7 years, I think, it's going to get interesting to see how this economy is going to work. Maybe that the OGs are going to sell.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Not. The universe, your job as a podcaster is probably to offer confidence to the listeners, but it's not the case that the universe owes that to the listener. So it could also be that if things don't add up, they don't add up, and that's your sign to have some skepticism.
I'm not sure if I have any job as a podcaster other than interviewing people, and I'm pretty sure that my sponsors would agree.
Well, yeah, I mean, you might not. I found that in my own show, when I wasn't offering confidence, the viewership would reduce. And I understood it in these terms. And so maybe that was my experience. And it doesn't mean, and maybe that was wrong of me to want more viewers, and maybe that was wrong of me to not pump Bitcoin. I don't really know. But that's how I saw the math on a lot of the platform options that I had.
Okay, don't feel guilty about it, because as we have seen in the first part of this interview, there are people who actually miss you. And even though they mock you for some of the choices that you have made, you still live in their heads, okay?
That's a comfort.
They still feel something for you.
Well, I probably speak to that 10 out of the 10% crowd, Like that's the crowd that I dealt with, and then we got overrun. And I think a lot of people have even told me as much in different terms. You look at,
and you think that's insignificant?
No, I don't think it's insignificant. I do see it as a failing. I do have some guilt over that, yes, and not because I think that, and not because it's not shame. I don't, the community isn't creating that guilt, or my obligations to the community isn't creating that. It's the hope in myself to have offered, I think, something more than what we even see now that I have guilt over, and not a lot of it. I'm not like up at night. Just I look back at it and I was like, that could have gone a different way, and I was there at a time when I could have done something different. And it's not like we're in a bad spot. Like we're guilty of our own success. Honestly, is really the only problem I think that I would see here.
I can argue that most people were not watching you necessarily for what you were saying, but for the fact that you were analyzing in ways that nobody else was doing. So even in your shillest days, when you're just someone who is trying to sell Bitcoin to people, you're still a lot more critical than most people around. And you're still a lot more critical than most podcasters today, who are very one-sided, and they basically try to sell Bitcoin. Yeah. And I may be myself guilty of that sometimes, but it doesn't mean that I'm not willing to discuss the issues that exist. And it doesn't mean that I don't project any kind of optimism that we can make it better if we get involved personally, because that's what decentralization is all about. It's all about agorism. It's all about getting involved, and voluntarism, and all of these isms that are favorable to the idea that one individual who sees the potential in something and wants to maintain it has to take action in regards to it. So if I want mining to get more decentralized, I'm going to get one mining rig. It doesn't matter if it's a processor, a video card, or anything. I'm going to get it running, and I'm going to tell everyone I know with the limited audience that I have that they should be doing the same for the sake of this project, which has the potential for improving human life on this planet. Am I an evil person? Am I a shill? I don't know, but I honestly believe that this is a lot better than monopoly over money. I'm pretty sure that this is a lot better than lots of authoritarian regimes, which my parents have witnessed firsthand because they were raised in communism. And it was that kind of totalitarian flavor of communism, not the one that you read in Karl Marx. And I honestly believe that based on the experiences that I acquired in this rather short life so far, that this is the moral and correct thing to do. And I just want, if there is any way in which I can help this project, I'm going to try to help it. And that's my moral compass.
That's great. It's a beautiful attitude. I don't want to discourage you. You may find that as you deal with lots of people, morality itself becomes very ambiguous at best, and you may just the entirety of any shared morality itself becomes demoralized, which is probably, I mean, it's kind of where I'm at this point. I just kind of given up. I think you'll see that like a lot of the negative emotions in society determine what it is that is the group's morals. Greed being like the obvious case here, vanity being the case in like most consumer purchasing decisions, and on and on. The audience doesn't really know what it's like behind the mic, and most people behind the mic don't know what it's like behind the mic. But you can see in yourself, if you do this for long enough, a kind of sort of like a factorization of values that it's good for you, actually. I think it's really, really, really good for you. But it creates it creates what you see in myself in a lot of ways, like somebody who appreciates the ambiguity more than the conviction. And that's it's a tough thing to live with and a tough thing to sell, even though I think it's a better thing to live with. I don't think it's a better thing to sell.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I love arguing. And I wouldn't have invited you if it was in any different way.
It's a favor something else I don't think people appreciate is arguing is a favor you offer society. It's not positioned that way. It's positioned such that it's like a bug, but I don't think it is. I think it's a feature. And I think society is worse off when the people who are good at arguing shut up. That's when I think the really bad stuff usually starts. So keep on doing that. That's good.
That's why I'm pretty sure that you should make a comeback of sorts whenever you have your issues in check.
Thank you. I don't know. I just, I'm trying to find, I don't know. I don't know what I'm even looking for. I'm just trying to find something more sensible than the path I see that we're on, as an obligation for a child mostly, because the kid's going to look at me and like, I don't know. I've been through a lot. Nothing terrible, but in terms of watching society change over time, it's been a lot. We've gone through some serious changes in society in the last 30 years, and maybe there's nothing new about that, and maybe it's new to me, but it's left me without a lot of easy words to offer people sometimes. They're just not easy words. So, you see some places to see where there is another place. We had a lot of shared values. Like, I think, geez, there's so much you can go on here, but like we used to have a lot more shared values, so that created significantly more objectivity in society. I think like the most watched episode of television was like the Beverly Hillbillies, where some gigantic amount of the population watched like the season finale, like greater than 50%, and that was in like the 60s or something, or the 70s maybe, and that was it. And that was the most coherent I think we probably ever were. And then it's been like less and less and less coherent since. And so now we have to argue about a lot more as a result. And some of that's an American issue, some of that's an international issue. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, if I can find a place where a lot of little stuff like going out of your house and deciding whether or not to wear face protection isn't a contention. That's an easy one, but there's a lot more on top of that, so.
By face protection, you mean sunscreen, right?
Yeah, I wish. I wish. I mean, even here in Florida, we had to deal with those freaking masks for a lot longer than I would have liked. I don't know. If people want to wear the masks, it's fine. I do want to wear the masks.
It's funny, and this goes back to Peter Todd once again. It seems like he's like a recurring theme during our discussion. But he tweeted like a few months ago that he was just taking a walk in the woods, and there was a person very far away in the middle of nature near a lake wearing a mask. Like there was no rational reason to wear that mask because there was nobody around.
That's the scientism at work right there. That's the people following the science that is a meaningless sign. Like that even attests to the mainstreamification of science even. Science was rendered meaningless to that person. It was no longer a meaningful thing other than its sign value. It was more important.
And also, just let me finish for the sake of it. So right now, where I live, there is no mask mandate anymore. We have gotten to the point where the pandemic is insignificant in infection numbers, and the pandemic in itself is a political decision, and they just declared that it's no longer mandatory, at least for now, to wear masks. But there are people who wear masks still, either because they're paranoid, or I have spoken to a girl who told me that she wears a mask because she feels more comfortable.
Florida doesn't have to wear a mask mandate, and people do it. Here, it's turning into a bit of like a MAGA hat kind of thing, but for like the other side. As for her, the reason she feels comfortable may very well be similar to that MAGA hat effect, where it's a social signal of her people. I don't know. I can only guess.
No, it's more like just it's like a blanket you put on. It's like a Superman cape or something. You put on and you feel more powerful. And for the same reasons, if she believes that she's gonna be more protected by wearing it in times when the likeliness of getting any kind of related disease is very low, and at a time in her life when she's in her 20s, so the consequences of getting infected are very low on her health. Plus, she got vaccinated, which supposedly is going to make her immune. Like, it blows my mind. There are so many layers on top of it, which present all the arguments against it, but still, it's a matter of comfort. Like, people have learned to... I don't want to call it a muzzle, because there's like a whole category of
it's a muzzle
content.
To me. That's what I see there, but
it is. But when you call it a muzzle, you're gonna get associated with the Alex Jones type of people.
But okay, so good. You see, there's a very significant observation there. Like, we are so far into this oppositional culture that connotation even stands in opposition to denotation. That's the one. So that's the one that really concerns me, actually. And I see as what you just said. That's what I see there. You see how muzzle as a connotation is a force in opposition to muzzle as a denotation, and that you would have to choose one or the other. Which it's kind of nothing. It's just like it's kind of like a creeping normality thing. But it wasn't in the 90s. I don't think that was the case so much. I think that we were just starting on some of this stuff in the 90s. But I had a Latin teacher when I was a kid, and this guy would like write into the newspaper with corrections on the English language, and I thought he was an idiot. And now I look back at him and I think, that guy probably was an idiot, but he was the most well-intentioned idiot I've met in a long time, ever since even. The guy was like defending the English language, knowing that we would need it one day, and at no compensation to himself. And it was a futile battle, but he tried. And it's because we're of things I think we're going to find here even. We're like, the word that is denotationally apt is connotationally offensive, and vice versa. The word that's connotationally apt is denotationally invalid. And you can see how denotation becomes like roughly proximate to truth. It's not, but like roughly proximate. And then connotation is like roughly proximate, and it's not the same with justice. But like it's the same kind of people I would think would go for, the people who are more concerned with justice will probably care more about policing connotation. The people who care more about truth will be caring about policing denotation. And there's no reason those two forces should be in opposition. They should work together. But because I think of the internet, it did become like dog whistles in spite games, and then they work against each other, because now it's no longer about communication, it's about tribal signaling.
I think you should definitely get out of the United States, maybe travel more to the the east.
That's when Pope. It's in the language. A lot of America's problems are in the language now, and I think that's probably that's not a good thing, because now you're.
Here in Romania, we still have some social justice warriors, and they have their own media empires, but the average person is just going to laugh at them and just say the words that they don't want us to say out of spite, and be like, who the hell cares? It's just a word. And at the end of the day, the average person is going to agree with that because we haven't gotten to the degree of brainwashing where you're not allowed to speak freely because somebody is going to get offended. But I very much fear that with the next generation, the Zoomers that are growing up today with social media and all of that standardization of thinking, they're going to end up policing everyone, and they're going to think that this is the actual norm and this is the way in which they should conduct themselves, and they should think, and they should do everything concerning their lives and everybody else's behavior.
That's very encouraging to hear. I don't, at least that you are not dealing with this there. My theory is that the language here is polluted enough to where conflicts are inevitable going forward. And I don't know how you unpollute the language. I would suggest you probably have to look at the university system, and I think you also need to look at the language itself. Does the language have like gender as part of its feature set? And if so, then you probably have some protections against oppositional nonsense. But it's a guess.
It's a hellhole because in Latin languages, you can have nouns that are masculine and feminine, just like in Latin. You have studied Latin. You have pronouns and nouns that are feminine or masculine. So you can take it back and try to reinvent the wheel and say, this should not be like car is a feminine noun in Romanian. And you think about it, why is it feminine? Like, also the plural is feminine. And you can have a neutral situation where you have the singular form, which is feminine, and the plural, which is masculine. So if you want to take it to these lengths, it's gonna become like hell.
Yeah,
I think in France they're trying to do this to some extent by eliminating gendered language.
That'll be the end of them. That's all. I mean, this is they'll lose their language, I think. Some of these language games we've seen in history, usually preceding conflict, like the French Revolution being the easy example, where like an entire tense was a dog whistle in the language. So like that's a case with the language like sort of created the conflict maybe, but it's my theory, it's just completely out of my ass, but it's my theory that if you have ambiguity in the language at this very denominational level, that ambiguity would be accepted at layers on top of the language itself. Whereas here in English, we have no concept of like gendered speech, and then it permits people to be offended by like misgendering, maybe. And not that that's the core of our concern. I just there's a lot of these trickle downs where like the language policing starts to become less tolerant.
And I know this is cliche, but I think that George Orwell in 1984 was so brilliant when he conceived the idea of newspeak.
Oh yeah, agreed. Oh, that was like the blueprint, I guess. Is like that. It was supposed to be a warning. It should become the blueprint. Like Paul Sports and I have talked about this before. That's just he undershot it, if anything. Like that was we're clearly there, and it's not the thing he got wrong. Maybe was that it was dystopian. Like that's where Brave New World got it right. Like we love to be slaves. Like that's you can see that even in the coronavirus thing. Like safety is like the best way to the best path to slavery. Everybody's all about it. It's just, and I accept that people love to be slaves. Love it. Nothing makes people happier.
Yeah, it's just that from time to time they change their masters. Yeah. Maybe that's a good place to end this. I don't know. I suppose that this is one of the reasons why people get into Bitcoin, just to try to break the cycle and feel in control of their own lives.
That was the case for me, and it is delivered there. And I would hope it delivers for everybody there.
You should come to Romania sometime. Like, really. You're gonna have a lot of fun.
I've been invited.
Many people speak English, and you're gonna have a good time. Just because women are not crazy yet. They still embrace their femininity as a feature, not a bug. They don't act like
keep the Americanisms out of your fucking bedroom. You're gonna end up doing discourse analysis with your wife, and she's gonna hate you. And then it's just going to destroy your country if you let that grow, man. It's funny. Humans, maybe this is Americans, humans look for these ideologies to explain the things they're going to do. Maybe I'm a little cynical and jaded, but like the cat didn't read the book on being a cat. The cat just did whatever the fuck it wanted. And then like we have these things that are manifestly cat. And somehow humans put the cart before the horse on stuff and sought to arrive at places that are antithetical to their goals. And I saw how it happened. It's gotten very perverse. The point that I've gotten to as well in all of this, like you mentioned the isms, and I think at this point almost all of the isms are useful, but not in the way we thought. I don't think that they're prescriptive anymore. I think they mostly just halt progress. It's like a kind of objectionism, that itself being an ism, but also like it's halting language. Like, this is a huge topic, and I guess I'll make it quick. But like, I took my dog to obedience school when I was a kid, and he wasn't an obedient dog, and he did not succeed. But that was a great microcosm for what it is we were looking at. Like when you go to school, you're not really going there to be educated. You're going there to become obedient, and we call that education. And maybe that's educated enough, but it's not education. And one of the ways I think that we succeed in educating in that environment is through the use of halting language. The same thing you do in dog obedience school, where you teach the dog to halt when there is the projection of competence in the form of an ism. But it's not to say that any of these isms have any truth to them otherwise whatsoever. You don't have to believe in any of them. You just don't. The only reason that they have any staying power is because they halt people. So I read about the isms because I like to halt people, but I know that's what I'm doing. Most people don't know that's what they're doing, and they believe there's a greater truth to some of these isms when it's not. They really exist just to stop action. And like I almost wonder if that wasn't like a forgotten knowledge, like the old men's club knew this once, and then we sort of erased that knowledge, and we ran with it, and then we ended up today where there's so many isms now that it's completely intractable to even know what is valid and what is invalid. It's not even a relevant question. There's just lots of fire hose tweets coming out at you, and the veracity is out the window. I don't know. Maybe that's a rant.
No, it's not. And actually, let me take this idea of educating children back to first principles, because I get to see them firsthand. And where I live, we have lots of children who unfortunately get abandoned or get forced to beg on the streets. And they don't go to school. And everyone's biggest concern is that they should go to school, because if they don't, it's likely that they're going to grow up and realize that they don't fit in this society and get violent. And that's the biggest concern. And that's also why you took your dog to dog school or whatever, because there's this constant fear that the person who is not going to accept your society is going to get violent. I think that primarily the function of schooling is to teach you to be obedient to the authority. In my case, I embrace it in the sense that I have learned to accept others and be peaceful to them and not desire to punch them in the face or something, which maybe I would have done as a natural human being which did not get educated. It doesn't mean that I accept all the masters and I bow to whoever comes and presents to me as an authority. But I still accept that, I have been enslaved to curb my violent tendencies, possibly. And I think that that's a net benefit for everyone. I'm not, I believe in the NAP, and let me take, I suppose this is going to be the last Derose Law that I'm going to quote tonight. But you mentioned at some point that, I don't remember where, but I've listened to many of your interviews, and you mentioned that there are 50-page libertarians and 1,000-page libertarians. Yes. And this also goes back to...
This is a John Seth innovation, but yes.
Okay. You mentioned that...
It's true. It is true. Those are the two things.
There are people who read stuff just to justify their own actions. And yes. I think that, for example, there is Roger Ver, and he poses as a libertarian, but he's not.
That may be.
But he will quote from Bastiat, he will quote from Adam Smith, he will brag about all the economic books that he read.
Because it halts
But
the
at the
audience.
same time,
it's halting language.
He's just trying to impose himself as an authority and doesn't believe that others should be equal to him.
Well, I will say, in Roger's defense, he has been, in terms of equality, he's been exceptionally kind to me. So that doesn't check out with regard to me. But if you see...
he was also nice to me, so I'm not going to say that he mistreated me or something or called me names.
If you see that behavior in him elsewhere, I wouldn't doubt it, but that has not been my personal experience with Roger Ver. However, some of it's the nature of being the orator in society, too. It's just... You're going to have to like cut the mic on some people, I guess. I don't know. The old Bitcoin meetings were like Socratic. You know, you take somebody who had some weight and it would be back and forth. Eric Voorhees being like a proponent of this style back in the old days. We lost that. Now it became sermons.
I can argue that now we have lots of shitcoins and they're going to dilute the whole purpose of the message. And somebody's going to...
Agreed.
Come and promote a Ponzi, and you're going to be like, why are we doing this anymore? Everyone comes in here trying to shill his own Ponzi, trying to convince everyone to invest in it. I've been to meetings where that's the case. That's what happens. Everyone comes with the expectation of convincing everyone else that they should buy into something.
Yeah.
And that's not productive. There's no common goal there. It goes back to what you said, that there was one TV show that the entirety of America was watching at one time. And then there was too much dilution and you have no idea what your common values are anymore. So what's the point of doing meetings unless you know that you have at least a common ground to discuss?
Yeah.
Like you also organized the meetup in Florida, as far as I know.
Yes.
And how did that go?
It went well. I mean, Jonathan, that was a great success in hindsight. You got to understand the times were not... nobody knew what Bitcoin was back then. And we would stick out like a sore thumb. And nobody gave us the time of day. And we got the last laugh. And everybody who joined us got the last laugh. And it was a gigantic success. Even if it wasn't populated by a lot of people, although there were times when we did fill up the venue. So, you know, those days were so far and long ago. I mean, that in of itself could be an entire show. But the times were different back then. People came, I think, with oddly like less skepticism in some ways. Certainly like less skepticism in the sense that I think, you know, like Bitcoin itself was like a viable product, but more skepticism in the space, like the space would be viable. Now I feel like it's the opposite. Now I feel like everyone thinks the space is viable, but the Bitcoin itself less so. Like that they don't want to pump their shitcoins because they're convinced that they can do better than Bitcoin, and that the space is certain. So I think that was actually kind of an interesting development.
You know, Chris, I would love to do this with you every week. Like, if I could do a show with you, I would be very happy because we never run out of stuff to talk.
Well, we can do this again. I'm doing a lot of traveling right now, and I'm in and out of places, and I don't even know my schedule just yet, but it's probable that I'll have reduced internet access in some places. But, yeah, you know, let's keep in touch. We'll do it again.
Oh, yeah. So this was a lot longer than most people would be willing to listen.
Yeah, we can edit stuff out, whatever.
I'm not gonna. Maybe
Okay.
just the part where you go open the door because someone was knocking.
Yes.
Or the one where I interrupted. But there's so much interesting stuff that was said during this episode, and I think it's a great opener for the rest of the season, which is going to be actually about philosophy. And it was Joshua's idea, Joshua from Voltoro. He told me that a lot of people don't even know anymore why they got into Bitcoin, and he feels a bit disappointed about the situation and wants to hear the kind of show which reminds people why this makes any sense at all.
You know, we may just be in the the 2020s of Star Wars here with Bitcoin kind of thing. It's just the original Star Wars had a lot more meaning than the later Star Wars, and we're commercially successful and then like spiritually bankrupt, and then we have to decide what it is we came for. I don't know.
Yeah, so my last argument is that I actually wrote an article about this, and it was called Principles versus Number Go Up, and it referred to the fact that a lot of people tend to turn a blind eye when somebody's pumping their bags, and unless we actually remember why we are here, we're gonna end up really badly being controlled by fiat billionaires who do whatever they want.
Yes.
And they can even hire their own developers and
Yes.
convince their new followers to follow them into a hard fork of Bitcoin and convince everyone that that's Bitcoin. So that can be an attack vector. Or else they can actually bribe existing developers or phase out the ones that exist and replace them. That's also something they can do. They can buy a lot of mining. They can do whatever. This world is just open to them. And the fact that they show goodwill and they try, like Michael Saylor is the textbook spook, in my opinion. First of all, he runs an intelligence company, which has worked with the government and keeps on working with governmental agencies. Someone pointed out to me that he's like 50 miles away from the CIA headquarters, so it's very likely that he had been visited and he is in touch with them and will not step out of line. So I don't think there's anything revolutionary or cypherpunk in what he's doing. Thirdly, he has stated many times that he wants Bitcoin to be just like gold, and he doesn't want it to be an actual currency. That's his vision of it. So I think that his understanding of gold is that we're gonna have gold bars being held by a custodian, and then you have like a label which says this gold bar belongs to blah blah.
I think Saylor
not
is
only
the
that,
future of the space.
just let me finish.
Yes.
Last argument.
Oh, yeah.
He has appropriated the language of the Bitcoin pleb.
Yeah.
Like he speaks in the same memes that we have created. And to some, this is like, it's like the song they wanted to hear. But I realize that this might be done on purpose. It's like a siren call. It's supposed to sound nice.
Yeah.
He's trying to convince people that he is one of us, but he's not, and he will never be.
His job is to tell people what they want to hear. He's going to do it. And he's probably going to do really good at it. I think he's the future of the space. And don't be surprised if, like, after Coinbase goes public, Jamie Dimon gets involved and says he's going to fix Bitcoin and succeeds. And then you end up with, like, SEC coin that runs, like, the Bitcoin repo. Like, I don't know that exact trajectory is going to happen, but I do see something very similar to that happening if and as this continues to grow.
I don't know. It's just, I agree with you that this has grown way too fast, and we didn't have much time to think about it and reflect about why we are here and what we want to do with this. Most people are just happy to sell their coins and get their house, get their Lambo, move to some place they like, and that's the end of it. They don't care much about anything or any of the principles that they have professed prior to purchasing whatever they desired. And part of me, is sad about it, but at the same time, I'm convinced that the coins they sold ended up in the hands of someone who's more convinced than them, or an exchange.
These same people pay you to be happy about it. Like, you get paid to leave in this space. That's your freedom. We can talk about decentralization and all of that, but it just seems to come down to my way or the highway, and then the highway ain't a bad plan for a lot of people. That's why the 10 out of the 10 out of the 100 people that we started with in this, it dwindles also as that newcomer number goes up. It's just later investors buy out the early investors. Is kind of how that goes. It's unfortunate.
I come from a family which used to own land before the communists came, and they also ran a small business with glass, just replacing broken glass, and they lost everything during the confiscation.
Yeah.
My grandfather had no access to education because he was part of the class which was enemy of the state, So he was not allowed to finish high school for a number of years before, I think he had to bribe the officials to actually be allowed to finish school. And then I had my parents who were not allowed to have any kind of private property and grew up in this country which brainwashed them. And then they had their wedding a year before the system collapsed. And they raised a lot of money and they wanted to buy a car for themselves because that's how they wanted to start a new life. So to get a car in the communist system, you had to deposit the money in the government's account, basically, and wait for 6 months to 1 year to have the car delivered to you. But then the whole system collapsed. And there was a lot of uncertainty in regards to having that car delivered, as well as lots of formerly state services. And it became obvious after 1 year that they were not getting that car, so they got their money back. But by the time they got their money back, inflation was so bad that the same money that they put in the car after the wedding ended up buying just one couch.
Jeez, man.
So I come from this kind of background. So to me, becoming a Bitcoiner is just, following the learnings of multiple generations of my family who lost it all.
Well, that's a fine lesson. Sad story, but here we are now. That it wasn't for naught. We can learn from it. I do think you're going to find that if you don't geographically assert your independence, that you will find yourself with similar issues, even if you use Bitcoin. I hate to tell you.
Yeah, I've been told that. No government is going to be friendly.
Or they will be friendly at your expense. They'll just show up and take all your Bitcoin, and then it'll be the opposite of being paid to leave. It'll be like they come and take your money, and then you get to be right, and they get paid. it's a very grim split. If you're advocating any kind of like zero-sum game, it gets very, very hard, I think.
Well, they cannot take something which does not exist.
Yes, well said. Very important.
So there's that. So I'm in this just for my personal ideological reasons. If they come in and steal my Bitcoins, they're going to be very disappointed. Like, oh man, I think the effort is not even worth it.
It may be. These are extreme politics, so it could. The government starts to resemble just a criminal gang at some point of dysfunction, and then your life is valueless, and any thugs who would just as soon make a mistake with you, taking a gamble that you might have Bitcoin and then splattering your brains against the wall, to find out that you don't. Those are people like to live only online, and then they don't know the history of how we've dealt with this offline hitherto now. So don't discount that possibility.
Yeah.
But
anyway, it's like 2:30 a.m. here.
I do think good things for the space. I just think that concerns are muffled when they really are constructive. And so everyone, you can hear an affirming word from like a bajillion people at this point. I'll tell you something that I think is more truthful, and that's kind of my personal preference. It doesn't mean that I'm right. In fact, it probably means that I'm wrong, but that's a longer discussion.
I'm actually happy that we found ourselves disagreeing on some ideas, but in the end finding ourselves agreeing with a lot. It just proves that we should talk more, not just we, in the sense that you and I, but people in the space in general, because I'm pretty sure that even if, the big blockers would talk to the core, what do you call them, cultists or something?
That's fair.
They would figure out that they have a lot in common, and they got in for some of the same reasons, and just because they have some personal problems with one another doesn't mean that they don't have any common goals.
I agree with everything you just said, but I will suggest that the contention I have with discourse is the medium, which does not amplify non-contentious discourse, generally.
That's fair.
That's a big
That's why
problem.
you're
Yeah.
not on Twitter, right?
Basically, yeah. People are gonna have to walk away. They're just gonna have to walk away, and I don't think they're gonna do it. So we'll see what happens.
It was really great talking with you. How long was it? Over 3 hours.
Yeah, I got 3.5 hours over here.
I'm not gonna edit much out of it because I think it was really good. And whoever listens to this, like, shout out, you're a hero. Whatever.
Well, thank you.
It takes a lot of determination to listen all the way to the end of the episode.
Yeah,
And
especially
I don't
me.
know what else I should say up to this point. Oh, can you guess who's gonna get interviewed tomorrow as part of episode 2 of the same season?
I would think it'd be cool if, like, Junseth were interviewed. I don't know if I think that's going to happen.
I would love to get him, but I don't think he likes me. But
Aw.
let's hope for the best. But other than that, it's someone who got on Bitcoin Uncensored at some point, and you roasted him, like, very hard. And for him to get on your show, he asked for your listeners to donate half a Bitcoin,
Was it Vlad?
which, yeah,
Zamfir.
exactly.
Tell him I said hi. I hope he's doing good. I hope everyone in the space is doing good.
I'm gonna talk with him from the perspective of him being an early Bitcoiner and his views on code is law and stuff like that, which
I'll tune into that. I'd like to listen to that. See how far he's come.
right now he's in a very different place from the one that you found him 5 years ago
I
or when you
respected
did the
him
interview.
a lot more than Vitalik. He was an asset to that project. Even though I didn't see things eye to eye, I could tell he had talent and he was eager. So yeah, I want to listen to that.
Well, I don't know what to say because right now he's no longer associated with Ethereum and he's suing them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not surprised. Oh, poor guy. I said hi. I wish him luck with his
Okay.
lawsuit. I do.
Okay, Chris, so this was great, and
Yeah.
I'll send you the link for Vlad's interview if you want to listen.
I do. Awesome. Looking forward to it. All right. Later, bud. Peace out, party people.
Talk to you later.
Golden Bitcoin, 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 golden Bitcoin. Voltoro.
Special thanks to Joshua Shigala from Voltoro for sponsoring this episode. Give him a shout out on Twitter, and also don't forget to go to bitcoin-takeover.com/Voltoro and claim 10 bits or 1000 sats for yourself on the Lightning Network. And also thank you Vake and thank you Evan Rose for being the second sponsors of this show and sending me a nice donation which allowed me to not look for a second sponsor. I appreciate it. So thank you very much, and I hope that you look forward to the next one, which is also pretty blasphemous, and I get to talk to Vlad Zamfir from Ethereum, who worked on the Casper system, and I got to ask him about Szabo's law and how he opposes it, and postmodernism, and postmodernism and absurdism, and all of that stuff. So I think it's also a good interview. It's kind of awkward. It's not as familiar as this one, but I'm trying to get you hyped, because if you like this one, you're gonna like the next one, and the next one, and another, and another, and another, and I'm gonna be like DJ Khaled of Bitcoin podcasting or something, whatever. So thank you very much for listening, for tuning in, and you're a hero for having the patience to get so far into the episode. Also, don't forget to check out bitcointakeover.com and the Bitcoin Takeover 24/7 radio, podcast, and music stream on Twitch and on YouTube.